Greetings, brothers and sisters. This is going to be an epic video. Often not often. I started making this video yesterday, started putting it together. It's about the potential fall of the Democratic Party and the RFK hearings. And, I'm really excited about it for lots of reasons. And, it usually doesn't happen. I make videos every day, but I'm really looking forward to this one. One of the ways I deal with the evil I cover, I cover evil here. I see evil every day, and it's pervasive. Evil in our system right now is pervasive. And what I mean by evil is that there is a divine plan. There is what's best in us. There's our full potential as divine beings. And when we're working towards that full potential, we are adhering to the divine laws, and we are making the choices that the divinity within us, our soul, God, wants us to make. We're making the right choices. But we have the option to make wrong choices. And that's where evil gets its play. And when I'm talking about that, I'm not talking about, oh yeah, he's talking about the Dems or he's talking about the liberals. I'm talking about everybody here individually and then all of us collectively making the wrong choices. And we have a system that's the wrong choice. Like we live in a system that is the wrong choice, and a wrong choice in such a way that it potentially could lead to the extinction of the human race. And I'll come back to that. But the way I deal with evil here is that this system that we're unfortunately 100% dependent on is a demonic and evil system, and it needs to feed off evil. It needs to feed off of wrong choices, ungodly choices, choices that our soul isn't okay with. And those choices are made more and more desperately by the people I cover here. The politicians, the media, the Hollywood, all of it. People who are so desperate to keep this system going that they'll break any divine laws and they'll go to any extent towards that end. And believing in God, as I often say, is believing that there's a plan and contingencies, so there's nothing that I have to do about it. I mean, personally, I have to do things. Personally, I have to be okay with my choices, and I have to align myself with my soul's path. But in terms of everybody else, it's not my problem. Everyone has their own personal choices to make, and then we have our collective choices. But I believe that there are contingencies that are at play, and that the system will be taken care of when it needs to be taken care of, and the human race will be dealt with in whatever way it needs to be dealt with. And maybe that's extinction of the human race. And it's hard for us to think about that, but that happens all the time. We're aware of, or most of us should be aware of, there's lots of endangered species that environmentalists are desperately trying to save. And of course, there are animals that have gone extinct, the dinosaurs being the big ones. I mean, the whole genre of animals that no longer exists. And it's a good thing, because if every movie you see, including the Jurassic Park movies, that involve either bringing back the dinosaurs or going to a time travel and going back to the time of the dinosaurs, those are all horror movies, right? Like if you could live with dinosaurs, it would be a horror show, right? These monstrous creatures that are predatory in nature, most of them, the ones that would make it a horror show. But even the ones who aren't would cause problems. Like you think about, rodents and small animals, mice, rats, things like that. And they spend most of their lives being hunted, and only their hyperdrive, like rabbits and all these types of animals, only their hyper sexual reproductive system of quickly reproducing keeps their species going, right? And so we would be like that in terms of the size of the animals or whatever. And so there are things that have to go extinct to give life to other creatures. There used to be giants here on this planet, things like this. And so that's potentially our outcome as a species. There's lots of evidence that suggests that that would be a good thing. But even with that, you still have your soul. You have your eternal soul, which is something that can't be killed. So whatever happens to the human race, you'll still have a soul. You'll still have your, bigger purpose. But I was kind of shocked to learn through the Sajmark teachings that a soul can be destroyed. That in certain circumstances or cases, the soul itself can be erased from existence, which is, a potential even now for wrongdoers. I mean, think about the way that the Christians believe that you go to eternal hell, which, I have a complete different understanding given past lives and future lives. That's just not an accurate description of what happens, that you either go to heaven or hell. But at least in hell, you have a soul. Your soul is still there. And your soul can't be tortured because it's a soul. It can be an unpleasant place. It can be in a place that's unpleasant, that you can't, a soul can just move throughout the universe, the etheric universe, the material universe. You can go to any planet you want, any star, just by the thought process. Your soul isn't bound by physical laws, but it can be staked up somewhere. And so there's a potential for even that to happen to some wayward beings that are thwarting the evolutionary process and the divine will. But as far as I understand it, there is a desire for, in terms of the higher developed beings that execute God's will on planet Earth, that there be some contingent of human beings that exist past the collapse of our system. And that's what I talk about here. Pockets of the Future is for those souls, those people, that will, in some ways, divinize this planet and get humanity back on track. Like, it's the point of what I make videos for. I explain, the inevitability of our collapse and what we need to do in the future. And the number one thing we need to do is get connected to God. That no matter what happens to us, if we die in the apocalypse, at least we should be going in the right direction. And the people that survive need to start putting together a survival plan so that they can survive the apocalypse and survive the future post-apocalyptic aftermath period. And so everything else I just don't care about. Like, I feel like it's my duty to get this future that I feel is inevitable, that is aligned with the predictions and the information I get from my spiritual belief system and also my own experience, that this is going to happen. Our system, our empire is going to collapse, and there's going to be some people who are left to, carry on. And I cover it quite substantially here. And in that, there's been the collapse of the Heartfulness organization that I'm a part of. We're doing this Gratefullness meditation. There's a big gathering coming up where I feel a lot of anticipation. I feel like this video is a part of that, right? This, what's I'm observing here. And, in that, when I covered the show, there is certain groups, like this case, it's the liberal Democrats, that I look forward to them getting their so-called comeuppance, right? This is a British word. When there's a bratty little kid, a prince or a little entitled little, brat, and the brat gets their comeuppance, right? Their karma, their, whatever you want to call it, because they've acted in such a way. And again, I'm not hating on Democrats and liberals. It's never endorsement of Trump or the Conservative Party or the Republicans who are, they have their own comeuppance they're dealing with right now. The right wing that I grew up with, the right wing and the conservatives were always in power when I grew up. And what you're experiencing now is your comeuppance, which you deserve. But the Democrats have gotten their power, the liberals, and they're acting, there's like these kids in a movie. You're watching a kid or a person, not always a kid, but a person in a movie. And they do such a good job of making that person unlikable. And you just can't wait for that person to get their just desserts, right? You can't wait for that person to that character to experience these horrible things. And the liberals and the Democrats are behaving in such a way. They're created their own wicked reality, which we all do, which we all have our own deviant reality from the divine reality. But theirs is, this collective madness that we see playing out in front of us. And, all of us are going to relish, I think, most of us, when they get slapped by the divine forces that are, here to correct things, right? And even in that, we're going to get tagged too. Like there's this idea that some Christian people have. They'll come and they'll say, no, the bad people will get theirs and the good people will be elevated. And that doesn't exist, right? This scenario, when an empire collapses, the good are punished with the bad. There's no other way. You can't retain your lifestyle and what you are comfortable with. And you see this in wars. You see it. In fact, most times the good people suffer more because they have the potential to suffer more because they're not, they don't have this level of denial, like the level of, people who have already chosen to basically die while living. The zombies and the walking corpses out there, the sheeple, the people who have stuck their heads in the sand, they don't feel anything. They're just inebriated. They're on medications. They're on, either prescriptions, medications, or some kind of self-medication. They're drunk all the time. They're stoned all the time. They're, even if they're not, or whatever, even if it's not some sort of drug, they're oblivious to what's going on around them. They've shut themselves off. They've withdrawn from the human experience, and they're just walking around like zombies, like ghouls. And for them, it's a quick death that they don't even really aware of. They're already, the walking dead. And so the people who have hearts, the people who care, the people who, experience the good things that the system and the world has to offer them, it's more painful. It always is. And so saints always suffer more than sinners. And that's always the way it's going to be. But in that, there are people who rise to power. And you see this, the villains in movies and books, and they think they got it. They think they've sewn it up. They think they have the power and it's going to last forever. And when that power gets yanked from them, and they're left from being on the top to being on the bottom, where, everybody that they've wronged, everything that they've done that's bad to other people is now there for them to experience. And the Democrats are like flirting with that right now. It's happened a lot faster than I even thought. Because I said this scenario was taking place with RFK. And it's a nightmare scenario for the Democratic Party of the Dems. And it was just so prevalent. My wife and I listened to the rest of this hearing. We listened to the whole thing. And the Democrats are just getting it handed to them, and it's wonderful. See, the Democrats went into this thing with a giant turd. Not just one turd, but lots of giant turds. They have such a turd, this guy, the hammer guy, Lawrence O'Donnell, has to cover RFK. His usual obsession with Trump, he has to cover RFK, and I'm not even going to get to that today. Like, I love mocking that guy, and I can't wait to do that. I'm not even going to get to that today. That's how epic the rest of this content is. I got all the clips aligned. I've got everything, to go. I've got a perspective. But when I first saw this woman, Stacey Plaskett, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, they took this line of this strategy of trying to paint RFK Jr. as a racist and an anti-Semite, and they know that that's not true, and they used a black woman and a Jewish woman to do it, right, which would make the most sense, and that's what I thought they chose these two people for. But then as I watched this and I saw all these prominent Democratic people or people who they all want their time. Like, this is an epic hearing, right? This is a big, giant, people are going to watch this hearing because it pertains to censorship. And there's so many people that experience censorship on social media. It's one of the few things that, people are going to watch. I don't watch these things, and I watch the whole thing, right? And so, and there's a lot of energy in it, and it has political ramifications. And every one of these politicians, they want their time. They want their spotlight. They want to be a part of the political theater. They want to display themselves. And, they're going to do that, right? In this, this hearing, they get that opportunity. And I was like, all these Democrats are yielding their time to Stacey Plaskett and to a lesser extent, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And I realized it's because these two people have to take responsibility for this giant turd because they know that they're wrong. And so what had happened was the Biden administration went to social media and pressured them to deplatform people. And along with that, there was the Hunter Biden thing. They had a massive cover up. And there's no rule of law, so they didn't really worry about that. They're not going to go to jail for this or whatever it is. But it's an epic embarrassment. It's a giant turd because Elon Musk, and I don't know if this was part of the plan or he just acted on his own, he went back in the Twitter files and released all this information. And we now know that the Democratic Party and the Biden administration, it's not Biden, he's like, too far gone. This is the people around him, have engaged in a violation of the First Amendment rights. And they all know it. The Democrats know it. Like, they have, there's no way they don't know that they're in the wrong. And, politics doesn't work like this, where a political party admits to doing something egregious, because it would be at the end of the Democratic Party. If the Democratic Party just said, yeah, we did this, and, the FBI and these other agencies, we all did this. We rigged the election against the Americans. We lied to you. We censored you. We broke, some of the the basic laws. The first law, the most important thing that the founders wanted to put in there was a freedom of speech, right? So, the founders that everybody celebrates, and to me, they're all Freemasons. I don't care. But, the people celebrate the founders of our country and the democracy. And Kennedy actually talks about this, which I'll get to. It's kind of, brilliant analysis. That the founders, the thing they thought was most important was freedom of speech. And Kennedy talks about why. Because it's truth to power. And once you lose the ability to express yourself, express your opposition to the official juggernaut of a story and of a narrative and a worldview, then you no longer have any sort of resemblance of a democracy, and that's what's happened here. And you see it happen in every country when they tamp down on freedom of speech. Your life is about to get sucky, because once you lose your ability to voice your complaints about something, I mean, think about that in any scenario, in a workplace, in a family, when you can't express the abuse that's happening to you, the mistreatment, you can't even express that. That situation becomes, like a horror show. And so the Democrats have this giant turd where they know that they've broken the first commandment of America, right? Like they know it. Like there's no way they don't. You can see it. And so they stuck this turd with Stacey Plaskett mostly, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who I'm going to tear a new one here. I don't want to, talk about her, but she's a disaster and has been forever for the Democrats, right? And so, like the fact that they're putting her out there in a starring role, and her and Stacey Plaskett have to slander a person from the most prominent Democratic family that exists. They are the OGs of the Democratic Party, the Kennedys, and all of it. They had powerful positions, the three sons, and the fourth son died defending his country in a a pilot, Joe Kennedy, Joe the Forgotten Kennedy. I saw this movie and I heard RFK talk about it. Right? They're legends. It's a legendary family, and they're Democrats. And so many people in the Democratic Party have association with Kennedy. The whole Boomer generation, the Kennedy family. Right? This is my older brothers and sisters. They all remember the tragic days when the two Kennedy brothers were assassinated. All of it, right? And so that's a turd in itself that they have to disparage this guy. They have to call someone from the most prominent Democratic family a racist and an anti Semite. And the family's extraordinarily liberal on top of it. And they've spent the whole family has politically and, monetarily spent their time propping up the Democratic Party, supporting the Democratic Party, and liberal views and causes. And RFK is well liked in the environmental community, which is a big part of the Democratic base. The environmentalists who know that this guy's been a champion for their causes. So these two turds had to, take it a one for this, fall on their swords and execute this, horrible defense. Like, they had to have a strategy. They couldn't just talk about the accusations against the current administration of the Democratic Party and social media and all the rest of it. And so they had to come up with a defense, and the defense is what they always do, is they say racism or homophobia or anti-Semitism and call you a bigot, and whenever you tell them the truth, you're somehow an evil, racist, homophobic, anti-Semitic person. That's their defense. Because they don't have any defense. They can't explain their actions. They can't defend what they're doing. And I didn't know this was going to happen this quickly, but they're all scared less of RFK. They're scared, and I said this before. And he's a threat to everything the Democrats have done and what they've become. And their fall of the fall from the Democratic Party from grace and their ideals. Embracing war and the military-industrial complex when they were the party of peace that protested against the Vietnam War. Now they're the pro-war party. They're the pro-big pharma party, which is, abhorrent in itself. And so they don't have anything, to stand on in terms of their integrity or any of these things. And I'm not saying the Republicans are better and that I'm, voting for the Republicans. But the Republicans in this scenario, the ones who are given time, they're like, they're attack dogs. They just lit up the Democrats like it's bad. Because the Democrats, again, I don't know whether it's the Democrats are just now this, this party of misfit toys and, like from the Star Wars bar scene, these, abhorrent, like ghoulish creasers who are mangled and, and have just nothing that you can see that's like quality, like the good qualities or anything, or that they just have been dealt such a bad hand in this this hearing. I don't know what it is, like maybe a combination of both. But either that way, they just get it handed to them over and over again. It's bad, and the Republican people just look better. And it's not because I agree with them or any of these things. They're just on point and they're clear, and they just are. It's pretty bad. It was an absolute slaughter. In ways that, make the Trump election, when Trump was election, and they all melted down on Trump's, election night, Rachel Maddow and the rest of them. This is even much worse than that because it has dire implications. Because the Democrats have a second turd, and that's Joe Biden. Joe Biden is clearly falling apart. We live in a time of truth. Like right before the system collapses, the truth just comes out, and consequences come with the truth. And you can't, hide your lies and your deception. And the Democrats can't. You can see it. They can't. And not that the Republicans have their lies. The Republicans are already experiencing this, like you Republicans are experiencing this right now. The lies of abuse and the lies of, your privileges and, the things that you've done when you were in power. as a group, as a as a race, as a as a contingent, you're now suffering those consequences. That's why Republicans have been miserable, because they've lost control over a system that they've dominated for centuries, right? The conservative aspect of the system. And you can say they're so much better than the liberals, but your domination of the liberals have turned them into, what they are now. And the vengeance that they're seeking now that they have the power, right? Now that they're the ones in control. But the liberals have this, the Democrats have this second turd, which is Joe Biden. They've been propping him up at Weekend at Bernie's, and you knew that that couldn't last forever. That he was senile when he ran in 2019. He was already, I would say senile, but he was showing signs of breaking down. And now they can't even ignore that. He has a turd in Hunter Biden that they don't want to, that they've covered up for, and like all the corruption, all his bad dealings, all those things are coming out. They can't stop it from coming out. And people know about it. And people are, there's the hardcore Democrats that are going to vote for a Democrat because they hate the Republicans and they hate Trump. But everybody else gets a sense that this is, the Democratic Party is doomed. And they don't want RFK Jr. That's the end of their power. It's the end of the Clinton and Obama regime and all these, hardcore, like the opposite of the neocons, like these neoliberals. The mainstream media, its narratives, all of this stuff, the MSNBC, CNN, and all the rest of the, nightly news. And it's all was ready to collapse. It had lost all like sort of momentum and mojo after Obama was like their pinnacle. And they didn't have anything else. They had horrible candidates. The party was in debt. Debbie Wasserman Schultz had run the thing into the ground, which we'll get into later. And they were just a mess. But they were given a gift of Trump. The Trump brought them back to life. They couldn't center their failed vision on what they were going to do, but they could be anti-Trump. And so it, gave these ghouls, these zombies, life. But now Trump is ending, and they, put in Biden, which was a mistake for them. And now they're having to deal with that. And their number one fear is the truth community of the internet and all this truth coming out, which could lead to God knows what for them, even personally in terms of criminal investigations, but is also the end of their reign of power, their time in the sun. And it's a brief period. And their weird agenda and the stuff they're pushing, the Hollywood morality and all this liberalism that goes against the divine will. And so in that, they have RFK. Like they're scared of this new truther movement. You can see it. Like that's their number one thing they talk about all the time. Conspiracy theorists, and what a threat they are to the country. And they have RFK. And 3 days into their reclaiming of the White House, the Biden administration tried to censor RFK. And that's a fact. And for nothing that's dangerous, the Democrats are saying that we need censorship. The Democrats are now saying that censorship and the violation of the First Amendment are necessary because the truth is dangerous. They're not saying that truth is dangerous, but they're, basically saying it. Like we know they're saying it. The truth is dangerous to the system and to them personally. So they have to censor it. And they were censoring RFK because they have these turds. And the biggest turd right now is Joe Biden, who isn't going to make it to the finish line. He's not going to make it to the end of his second term. And more than likely, he isn't even going to make it as a candidate. And the one thing they have with Joe Biden is he can refuse to debate RFK and treat him as like a reasonable candidate. They can ignore him. And I said this, we got to, make this happen that they can't ignore. We got to contribute to making this happen because it's great. It's great watching it. It's amazing. And the Republicans know this is their strategy. So they gave RFK a platform. And I know he's going to get a boost whether the polls indicate it or not. He's going to get a lot of love from what just happened in these hearings. And the Republicans are like, like giddy about it because they knew that RFK is a nightmare for the Democrats. It's a nightmare on so many different levels because of his family, because of his ability to articulate these things, his debating skills, and the other things that he's about. And the Democrats are doing anything possible to not give RFK a platform. So much so in a hearing about freedom of speech and censorship, they're trying to censor him with bogus claims that they know are bogus, and pretty much everybody else does. And so it's turning epic right now, because if he ends up being their nominee, then he's in charge of the Democratic Party. And he's against everything that these people have become. And so it's a disaster for them. And it means the end of whatever. Either he loses and they get Trump again or whatever. I guess that would be good for them in some way. I mean, they'd have almost no choice but to campaign for Trump at that point. But it's shaping up right now much earlier than I anticipated. Like, I think he's already at 30%. And that's just going to go up. And so let's get into it here. So the hearing just exhibited all these wonderful subplots and narratives, and it's just wonderful. So I covered this in a long video entitled, let me find it here. It's taking a while for it to come up. And how the Democrats played themselves and turned Kennedy censorship hearing into a joke. So I covered a bunch of the stuff already there. If you guys haven't seen that already, and I don't know how many people have, 4,700. Well, that is what it is. But this is the things this is what I showed you at the beginning of that video. One thing I'm going to show you again, because it comes from RFK's opening statement. But this is, immediately, well, let's just play those clips here.
On the third day of this administration, January 23rd, 2021, the White House sent an email to Twitter. The email said this: wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP, in all caps. That third day, what did that tweet say? Tweet from Mr. Kennedy said this: Hank Aaron's tragic death is part of a wave of suspicious deaths among elderly closely following administration of the vaccine. He received the vaccine on January 5th to inspire other Black Americans to get the vaccine. Now, what's interesting about the email that the White House sent to Twitter is the subject line says, flagging Hank Aaron misinformation. Now, misinformation is when you don't have the facts right. You're saying things that aren't true. But when you look at Mr. Kennedy's tweet, there was nothing in there that was factually inaccurate. Hank Aaron, real person, great American, passed away after he got the vaccine, pointing out facts. And yet the White House on the third day was trying, actually 1:04 a.m. on January 23rd, 2021, 37 hours into the administration, they were trying to censor Mr. Kennedy. I find that interesting.
When I gave my speech, my announcement speech in Boston 2 months ago, YouTube, I talked about all those issues. I focused on grocery. I focused on the fact that working class people can no longer afford to live in this country. I talked about inflation, all the issues that deeply concern you, and that you've devoted your career to alleviating those issues. 5 minutes into my speech, when I was talking about Paul Revere, YouTube deplatformed me.
So let's go to Kennedy's opening statement. And one thing that I forgot was, I was talking about this a little bit, but I didn't complete my thoughts on it. The Democrats and the mainstream media have been aware that since the onset of social media, they have lost control over the message, the media, and the platforms. It's all they care about. And the Republicans, to some extent, understand this as well, but they're, hemorrhaging so much power to the Democrats and the media. Their main objective is to take down the Democrats, right? And, so they're willing to roll the dice with social media and censoring social media. But the Democrats who understand that the social media giants are controlled by either the intelligence community or liberal-minded people have used that to try to censor and erase what we now know is their biggest fear of the truth community. And RFK, whether you believe it or not, RFK Jr. is a truther, and whether you think he's a shill, and there's things in his opening statement you're going to have a problem with, some of you guys. But whether he's a poser or a real truther, and I believe he's sincere in his beliefs, but it doesn't matter if he is or he isn't, he's embraced the truther narratives, and he's embraced social media. He's running a complete social media campaign because he knows that nobody watches the news anymore. He knows that nobody listens to politicians anymore. But there is a lot of play on the social media energy and the social media networks. And so they've been trying to censor him and keep him from debating. But if Jojo Magoo doesn't make it, or he gets pressured into debating RFK, they know they're going to lose. Because they know the social media message, the truther message, appeals to people. They know it. They know they've already lost. I've been talking about this for years, right? That's why they're trying to censor us, because the social media, the truther message on social media is so much more compelling, and many more people than they're willing to acknowledge, listen to it. And nobody listens to them anymore other than a dying generation. And if Jojo Magoo doesn't run, they have the same turds of candidates. Gavin Newsom, who they love, who is running the rich people and other people out of his state. California is a disaster, right? And he's a disaster with his mullet, and he just sucks. But all the other candidates, including, Kamala Harris, they propped Kamala Harris up, and they gave her, she ended up getting 12% of the Democratic vote for about a week, and then the spotlight was on her, and the Democrats took a good hard look at her, and they realized, oh my God, we don't want her. And she never polled above 1% from there on. She lost any chance of being a viable candidate, and she's unlikable. And then it's all the same turds of candidates that couldn't beat Joe Biden in the first place, minus Bernie, who had all the enthusiasm behind him. And so RFK will get the Bernie supporters. He'll get independents and right-wing people, and his message will be more compelling because we know when people are given the choice between mainstream media and truther media, they'll take the truther message 2/3, 2-1. And, that's happening right now. And they're aware of it. They're scared less of it. You can see it in every possible way. So they're trying to take him down and have been doing it since they got power in 2021. One of their first acts was try to censor RFK and all the rest of us. And now it's, this is coming full circle. So let's get into his opening statement here.
Exposures. I assume that being a father of 7, in addition to being one of 11 children himself, fuels his interest in children's health. Following the 2016 election, Mr. Kennedy met with then-President-elect Trump to discuss his potential for a committee to examine vaccine safety and scientific integrity. Their conversation also touched on the CDC and ways to increase independence from financial conflicts. Most recently, Mr. Kennedy announced his campaign for President of the United States. During his campaign announcement, he stated, quote, "My mission over the next 18 months of this campaign and throughout my presidency."
If you'll please stand and raise your right hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to put aside my written statement for a moment.
So something significant happened there. The Republicans, after, battling off the Democrats, the Republican majority, got this guy a platform. Right? Think about that. This is a liberal Democrat, one of the most liberal families, the Kennedy family, a more formidable candidate than Joe Biden. And they're giving this guy a platform. They're propping him up. We saw this with the Democrats, with anybody who attacked Trump from the Republican side. Liz Cheney, Cohen, any of his former buddies, John Bolton. Anybody who turned on Trump, the Democrats would give a platform. But these people weren't viable candidates that could defeat Joe Biden. But Kennedy can defeat anybody the Republicans put out there. And yet the Republicans are still willing to roll the dice and give him a platform. And the Democrats are trying to censor him. So this is like wonderful. This is a wonderful narrative right off the bat, right?
And address one of the points that was brought up, I think an important point by the ranking member, that this body ought to be concerning itself with issues that impact directly the American people. The rising price of groceries, 76% over the past 2 years for basic foodstuff, the war in Ukraine, the inflation issues, the border issues, many, many other issues that concern us all as a nation. We can't do that without the First Amendment, without debate. When I gave my speech, my announcement speech in Boston 2 months ago, YouTube, I talked about all those issues. I focused on grocery. I focused on the fact that working class people can no longer afford to live in this country. I talked about inflation, all the issues that deeply concern you, and that you've devoted your career to alleviating those issues. 5 minutes into my speech, when I was talking about Paul Revere, YouTube deplatformed me. I didn't talk about vaccines in that speech. I didn't talk about anything that was a verboten subject. I just was talking about my campaign and things, the conversation that we ought to be having with each other as Americans. But I was shut down, and that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy. We need to be talking to each other.
All right. So we differ here. I differ with most of you and differ with him that I don't believe the system can be saved. There's no scenario in my calculations of what's going on, my understanding of what needs to happen in the future, that God would endorse the saving of our system. Like I said, I'm supporting Kennedy because it's just the right thing to do. Like, I don't believe that there's, a silver lining or a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, any of these things. In terms of the system being saved and our lifestyle being kept intact, I don't, you guys know that who watch me. And the higher part of me, the non-selfish part, the soul part, relishes not relishes, but accepts and supports and is working to be grateful for, or is grateful. Your soul is always grateful for the collapse of the system so something better can come. Pockets of the future, right? Something better. Something beyond what we have now. And I know that the truth community represents a part of the end of the system. Because when people are aware of the truth of our system, is powered by perception, by illusion. And so when the truth comes into the picture, the system's weakened. It's already been severely weakened by all the people that have woken up one way or another. Whether they're woke people, whether they're QBs, whether they're any of these people who are no longer buying into the mainstream official narrative, it weakens the system, and the system's on the ropes. And so by giving us a platform and allowing Kennedy in this case to speak, it's weakened a system that we're all 100% dependent on. And I recognize that, that sucks for us on a level we're not aware of. But still, it needs to march forward. We need to march forward, regardless of the outcome.
Now, this is a letter that many of you signed, many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. This 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing. The charges in this, and by the way, censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father, to my uncle, to FDR, Harry Truman, to Thomas Jefferson, as the chairman referred to. It is the basis for democracy. It sets us apart from all of the previous forms of government. We need to be able to talk, and the First Amendment was not written for easy speech. It was written for the speech that nobody likes you for. And I was censored not just by the Democratic administration, I was censored by the Trump administration. I was the first person censored by as the chairman pointed out, by the Biden administration 2 days after it came into office. It ordered a truthful, and by the way, they had to invent a new word called malinformation to censor people like me. There was no misinformation on my Instagram account. Everything I put on that account was cited and sourced to peer-reviewed publications or government databases. Nobody has ever pointed to a single piece of misinformation that I published. I was removed for something they called malinformation. Malinformation is information that is true, but is inconvenient to the government, that they don't want people to hear. And that's antithetical to the values of our country. After I announced my presidency, it became more difficult for people to censor me outright. So now I'm subject to this new form of censorship, which is called targeted propaganda, where people apply pejoratives like anti-vax. I've never been anti-vaccine, but everybody in this room probably believes that I have been, because that's the prevailing narrative. Anti-Semitism, racism, these are the most appalling, disgusting pejoratives, and they're applied to me to silence me, because people don't want me to have that conversation about the war, about groceries, about inflation, about the war on the middle class in this country that we need to be having.
So as we go through this, there's going to come up time and time again, because this is the Democrats' only argument here. They don't want to talk about censorship. Their arguments are twofold. One, that Kennedy is an anti-Semite and a racist. And, and I'll talk about what that's based in as we go through here. But that's that's an act of desperation, because he could win the Democratic nomination, like I said. And that's a, pretty severe accusation against somebody who no one's ever said that before. Nobody's ever talked about this. This has to do with two things. One, what he said about the studies, which are going to be cited here by the Republicans, the studies that showed that based in racial genetic makeup, COVID hit some people of the genetic disposition of some people harder than others. People with a genetic disposition, like white people and African Americans and other groups less than. And he said Ashkenazi Jews and Asians. And the idea that this virus came from China, which he didn't say, he didn't say that in what he was saying. And I'll get into, he had another explanation in an interview that I heard, which gives this more context, right? But he said this one thing that wasn't racist, wasn't anti-Semitic, but that's all they got. And it happened fairly soon, fairly recently. And that's all they got with that, right? And the other thing is, they're saying that all this information that we're putting out as a truth community is dangerous to people. And so it's like shouting fire in a crowded theater, that we are saying things that are dangerous to the system, so we have to be censored. So those are their two arguments, right? They're not saying that censorship isn't happening. They're not saying that, any of these things are untrue, or any of these things that Kennedy or any of these people are saying in terms of what Biden has done is untrue. They can't say that because it's fact. So they've already lost. And so all they have is two excuses. One, Kennedy is racist and anti-Semitic. And two, the truth community is dangerous to the system, the beast.
And by the way, I want to say this while I'm on the record, that in my entire life, and why I'm under oath, in my entire life, I have never uttered a phrase that was either racist or anti-Semitic. I have spent my life fighting my professional career, fighting for Israel, for the protection of Israel. I have a better record on Israel than anybody in this chamber today. I'm the only person who has publicly objected to the $2 billion payout that the Biden administration is now making to Iran, which is a genocidal program. I'm the only one who's objected to that. I've fought more ferociously for Israel than anybody. But I am being censored here through this target, through smears, through misinterpretations of what I've said, through lies, through association.
So what he just said there is not going to be great for some truthers. You know, if you're looking for a reason not to support Kennedy, you're going to find it as a truther. Like him saying that he's not anti-boop. You know, he's had all the boops, and his family's had all the boops. And he's just, the only one he hasn't had is the most recent one. And so, you know, there's sort of a contradiction in what he's saying in terms of, if you hear the interviews, he's pretty savage on the effects of the boops collectively, right? And he got brought into this thing by mothers who had their children melt down after getting, you know, young babies getting the boop and then getting autism. So there's things that he says that, I mean, again, he's got to be a politician. He's got to do whatever he's got to do. And the anti-boop position is bad for him politically. So that is whatever it is. The things he said about supporting Israel, and there's so many people in the truth community that are, you know, if not anti-Israel, they're, you know, I mean, Israel, what they're doing to Palestine and, you know, their influence on, you know, they're a player, right? And so that's not great for some truthers. But again, it's not the issue here. It's not what's important. And what's important is the destruction of the Democratic Party. And, you know, whatever way that takes place, with RFK winning the nomination being the best possible outcome, you know, again, you have to ignore things like this, right? You're not going to get anybody who agrees with you 100%. And you have nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose by supporting RFK because the system can't be saved, right? It isn't like, oh my God, I'm going to get duped, or I'm going to get played by this guy or something like that. There's no reason not to support him because, you know, there's no saving the system, right? Because you don't want to, you know, go out on a limb and be proven wrong later on. You don't want to get QB'd and happen what happened to the QBs. Well, you can do it just for the entertainment value. Like, you don't have to do it like actually believe in him. Like, I don't believe he's going to change anything. And I don't believe the system can be changed. And, you know, he might help expedite the destruction of the system, which we're 100% dependent on, because that's what ultimately the only outcome of the truth community is the destruction of the system. The only proliferation of the truther narratives is the destruction of the system. And so for me, it's just, you know, it's the right thing to do. But other than that, it's entertaining, right? Because this hearing is really entertaining when you see it. See how desperate the Democrats are.
Which is a tactic that we all thought we had been discredited and dispensed with after the Army McCarthy hearings in the 1950s. But those same weapons are now being deployed against me to silence me. I know many of the people who wrote this letter. I don't believe there's a single person who signed this letter who believes I'm anti-Semitic. I do not believe that. There is no evidence of that.
So this is a huge statement because, you know, of the family he comes from and the work he's done for the liberal community, particularly around the environment. He's litigated countless cases, not countless, but lots of cases against, you know, pollution of the environment, which is maybe the most important thing to the liberal person, the liberal voter. And he comes from this family, this prominent family. And so he's saying that all these people in the hearing, they all know he's not anti-Semitic, and I know they know this. They know that he's not anti-Semitic and he's not racist. The evidence is really flimsy, but it's all they got. And it shows you how desperate they are, right? That they're willing to turn on one of their own from the prominent Kennedy family. They're so desperate to not have all of these things brought out in the mainstream situation, which they're going to be if Kennedy debates. And the people, the poll numbers, no matter how they try to jerry-rig the polls or whatever they do to sort of gerrymander the electorate, whatever things that they do. I'm getting my Jerry. Whatever they do to try to rig it or, show that the people don't care about these things, we know they do. We know where the energy is. Everyone does. The energy is in the alternative media truth community. And truther narratives win amongst all other things. It's where the energy is. It's where the people's passion is. And it's where people will end up, the majority of people, if they're given the option of the old stale mainstream media and the old stale politicians and somebody who embraces the truther points of view. And again, we're divided. The truth community sucks and we're divided and, whatever that is. But if you put truther narratives versus mainstream narratives against each other, people will be drawn to the truther stuff. Even if they don't like it, even if it's like with Trump being the villain, Trump embraced some of these things. And even if you're against the truther narratives, you're going to watch that stuff, right? You're not going to go listen to some political morons, experts, these pundits drone on MSNBC and CNN and Fox. When you can hear truther narratives, it's just, they're much more interesting. They're more compelling. Even if you don't believe in them, it's where the energy is. Like that's where the energy is in politics and everything else. And they know it, we know it, everybody knows it, right? And so they're just making up this stuff. Like, this is great.
I want to say something I think that's more important, and it goes directly to what you talked about, ranking member, which is the need, this toxic polarization that is destroying our country today. And how do we deal with that? This kind of division is more dangerous for our country than any time since the American Civil War. And how do we deal with that? How are we going to, every Democrat on this committee believes that we need to end that polarization. Do you think you can do that by censoring people? I'm telling you, you cannot. That only aggravates and amplifies the problem. We need to start being kind to each other. We need to start being respectful to each other. We need to start restoring the comedy to this chamber and to the rest of America, but it has to start here. My uncle, Edward Kennedy, has more legislation with his name on it than any senator in United States history. Why is that? Because he was able to reach across the aisle, because he didn't deal in insults, because he didn't try to censor people.
I agree with this and I don't agree with this. I agree with this for him and for them, but not personally. Like, I have no interest in having conversations with people who disagree with me, especially sheeple, but anybody. Like, I have no interest in arguing with them. I have no interest in listening to their point of view because I already know their point of view. They're not going to tell me anything I don't know about them because I study this all the time. I understand what everybody thinks here. Like, there's nothing, there's crazy people and people who are just, there's information out there I don't have access to. But in terms of the major demographics out there of people, whether it's, you all in the truth community and the various belief systems in the truth community or the belief systems of all these other people, I hear it all the time and it's, painful to listen to, right? And I know that I'm not going to change those people. And so I'm not going to waste my voice because, I constantly are getting sore throats, I have, I have to preserve my voice and my energy level. And so, I know these people aren't going to change. I know the system can't be saved. But what he's saying here is right, because the cancel culture that exists now and people being able to express their their inner truth, especially right now when truth is coming to the surface. Like I said, truth always comes to the surface before the apocalypse, and it's coming out, and it needs to be expressed. And so, yeah, I mean, people should be kinder to each other. The division's what's killing our country. And if you don't see that, you want to be divided. You want to hate on the Democrats. You want to hate on the liberals. You want all these things, right? I enjoy seeing these narratives and this consciousness get destructive, but I don't hate these people because that makes me feel bad. Hatred makes you feel bad. Hatred is in you, right? The object of your hate is whatever it is, but the hatred's in you. I say this all the time. And so, I don't indulge in any of those things because it's bad for me. But I will be happy when the truth comes to light, whenever it does. And people get, rung up like the Democrats are getting rung up here. And it gets bad. Like the Republicans did a masterful job here with Kennedy and with the research they did. Like they're citing legitimate things, which I'll show you in a moment. And they do it throughout the hearing. I can't show you all of it. And the Dems just have these conspiracy theories. Like the Dems have a conspiracy theory that Trump or that RFK is conspiring to hurt black people and hurt Asian people and hurt Jewish people, right? And he's not. He clearly isn't, right? But they've come up with this conspiracy theory. They've conspired to put this theory out there, of a conspiracy that he has with himself to do damage to these people when he doesn't, right? And he's part of a larger conspiracy with the Republicans and Trump to put out lies and disinformation to hurt everybody and prevent them getting the life-saving boop
home people who were antithetical to what he believed in. He came home almost every weekend with people like Orrin Hatch to our house at the compound in Hyannisport. At that time, Orrin Hatch to me was like Darth Vader because I was an environmentalist. And I was saying, why is Teddy bringing this guy home? But he knew that he was effective because he understood that comedy and respect and kindness and compassion and empathy for other people is the only way to restore the function in this chamber. But more importantly, today we need to give an example in the leadership of our country of being respectful to each other. If you think I said something that's anti-Semitic, let's talk about the details. I'm telling you all the things that I'm accused of right now by you. And in this letter are distortions, they're misrepresentations. I didn't say those things. There's fragments that I said, but I denounce anybody who uses the words that I have said to imply something that is negative about people who are Jewish. I never said those things. And I want to point out also that the chairman pointed to Dennis Kucinich, who's fighting behind me. There is no two people in the country who feel more differently about American politics than these two people. And yet they were friends. Dennis attended his children's basketball games, attended his daughter's wedding. This is what we need, how we need to start treating each other in this country. We have to stop trying to destroy each other, to marginalize, to vilify, to gaslight each other. We have to find that place inside of ourselves of light, of empathy, of compassion, and above all, we need to elevate the Constitution of the United States, which was written for hard times. And that has to be the premier compass for all of our activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to raise a point of order.
Gentlelady can state a point of order.
Point of order pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, which Mr. Kennedy is violative of. I move that we move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy has repeatedly made despicable anti-Semitic and anti-Asian comments as recently as last week.
So that shows you everything you need to know. Kennedy gave, sort of an epic introductory statement where he clearly not only states that he isn't racist or hasn't said anything racist or anti-Semitic, and then he says these guys are all frauds because they signed this letter and they tried to censor me and they all know it's not true. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz, whatever RFK Jr. was going to say, she's not going to listen to it because they don't listen. Nobody listens. No one's going to change. They came in with an agenda. And she breaks into, the flow of the thing. And I'm going to, she's just a ghoul. And I mean, just look at her. But I'm going to rip her apart later. Like I wanted to do it here in my video last week, but I'm glad, 2 days ago, not last week. But I'm glad I didn't get a chance to do that because she gets even worse later on. And her and Kennedy get into it. And it's amazing. Like she's going to, I'm really looking forward to that part of the video. But she's trying to, put this to vote and trying to get him thrown out of this thing. And, he's a Kennedy, right? And he hasn't done anything wrong. And she said he's repeatedly made these statements, but no one's accused him being racist or anti-Semitic or anti-Asian before. Like it's just something he said recently, which they're taking out of context. And there's scientific evidence to back what he's saying. And he's implying some things there that he didn't say outright, which they're saying he said outright. And the Republicans are going to bring in the studies that Kennedy talked about, that Kennedy's going to himself cite the study. And again, this is all, this is legitimate. Like if he's making things up here and he's lying, it can be, I don't know if there's perjury involved here, but when he says something here, it's different than saying something on Joe Rogan or some interview. Like this is an official hearing, right, of the United States government.
Rule 11, Clause 2 says, whenever it is asserted by a member of the committee that the evidence or testimony at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate any person, or it is asserted by a witness that the evidence or testimony that the witness would give at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate the witness, and it goes on. Mr. Kennedy, among many other things, has said, I know a lot now about bioweapons. We put out hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there is an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races.
There's two things there, one of which I'll address later. Why are they rolling out this school, like this loser and failure, which I'm going to... And that's coming later on when she goes at it with Kennedy, which is one of the highlights for me of this thing. It shows just how bad the Democratic position is here. But what he said was there's an argument that this is ethically targeted. He didn't say he had the evidence for that. What he said he had was he understood that there is, which of course there would be. If you're going to make a bioweapon, wouldn't you make the bioweapon less likely to hurt the demographics that your country, the genetic makeup of people, less likely to hurt you than your enemy, right? If you could make a bioweapon that had a higher kill rate for against your enemy than you, then that would be, what you would do, right? If you could do that, you would do that. And we do crappy stuff like that. And he's saying both the Chinese and the American government has done this. And he said this before somewhere else, and I'll cover that later. Well, I'll just say it now. He said this, that we're all doing this. And this weapon, this bioweapon was leaked. And, I think it was intentional, whatever. I've given my opinion on that. And it was targeted against certain groups. And the evidence he has for that is there are studies out there, plus there's just the statistics that show that Asian people are less likely to die than other groups, for example. That's not anti-Asian, that's science. That's the way it played out, right? And that was in America. That isn't even talking about China. That's talking about just America, where Asian people were less likely to die 2 to 1 than some of these other groups. And so he didn't say that he knew this, it's a slam dunk. He said there's an argument to be made. So that isn't anti-Semitic, anti-Asian, or any of these things. He's saying based in the science, this is one possible scenario or possible reality. But he didn't say he had the information on that, and he didn't say it outright. And so they have nothing here, right? They have nothing. She has nothing. See, the part where he says there's an argument to be made. He didn't say this is factual, this is what I know. He didn't Alex Jones it. He didn't overpromise. He didn't pretend he had something he didn't have. He said that this is a theory, right? He's floating out a theory that if the Democrats didn't bring it up, he wouldn't have talked about it at all at this hearing. And so what her point of view was, what she's breaking in to say here, and she's doing this on behalf of the Democratic strategy, was that this stuff that he's saying is potentially dangerous to Asian people, which they're going to talk about later, and other groups. But Kennedy was never going to talk about that. He was going to talk about the censorship he experienced, like he did in his opening statement. They are the ones who want to talk about this. They're the ones who are making an issue. They're the ones who are giving this theory life. They're the ones who are making this theory that he put out there the centerpiece of their defense, right? And so she's accusing him of dangerous rhetoric that would be said in this hearing and giving this guy a platform so he can spread this dangerous, racist, anti-Semitic, anti-Asian rhetoric. But he was never going to talk about it. He wants to talk about the legitimate evidence and the facts that the Biden administration and the government and the FBI engaged in censorship. That has nothing to do with this other thing to do with COVID, that had to do with the vaccines or any of these other things. He doesn't want to talk about that. And he wasn't going to talk about that. He only talked about it because they brought it up, and they repeatedly do so. So they're completely caught in their own web of lies, right? Their own, she's saying it's dangerous to talk about this, so we're going to make it the centerpiece of the thing that we're going to talk about over and over again. We're going to talk about it throughout, and it's the only thing we're going to talk about in regards to Kennedy, because they're trying to paint him with these labels that they're going to use later on when he's running against Jojo Magoo and he's defeating him. They're going to bring this back up. This is going to be something, unless it just totally doesn't, like it just bounces off him, which I think it already has. They're going to bring this up time and time again as a way to, this is what they're campaigning against him. They're trying to link him with Trump and the so-called right-wing racists that they've done with the whole truth community, right? The whole argument is the truth community is made up of right-wing hateful racists that make up things about other groups and are dangerous and will do things to these other groups based in their saying things on the internet. And so they have to be censored to prevent violence of, some sort of violence from happening from this rhetoric. And none of that stuff is factual. It hasn't borne, and it's not borne out in reality, right?
Proportionately, the races that are most immune to COVID-19 are...
A lady making a motion or a speech?
I've made a motion to move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy's testimony...
Mr. Chairman, I
and
move
his
to table the
previous
motion.
statements-
The gentleman from Kentucky has moved to table.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a roll call vote on the motion to table.
Well, let me ask the question. The question is on the motion to table. The gentlelady has asked for a roll call vote. The clerk will have to step back for a second. The clerk will have to come in. We'll call the roll on the motion to table, and then we can get back to testimony.
I think the witnesses can sit in the chairs sitting behind.
Okay, there might have been something that happened afterwards. I might have that later on. I don't know. No. We'll see. I organized this the best I could. But this next exchange is epic because this woman brings up a poll that says that Democrats, a high number of Democrats, wouldn't have voted for Jojo Magoo had the Hunter laptop story broke. And this Republican woman says that. And the Democrats come in and say, where's this poll? And then she brings in the poll. Also, there was this other piece where they're, I'll show you. Let me just show you the clips. And then they'll show you the two follow-ups where they introduce this stuff into evidence. Then I'll explain it on the other end.
Mr. Kennedy, I want to turn to you. You've heard me lay out this example of egregious and illegal government censorship. You have been censored yourself. Do you believe that government censorship is a form of election interference?
I think democracy is dependent on the free flow of information. And if that information is distorted, if the public is lied to, then it interferes with election. And by the way, it interferes with public health. And the Wall Street Journal did an article a couple of weeks ago suggesting that the censorship of important health information cost American lives.
And Mr. Kennedy, I want to ask you specifically about the Hunter Biden laptop story. The total blackout on all social media outlets as well as telecom. You couldn't text the link to the Hunter Biden laptop story. This specifically was a form of election interference by the U.S. government in the 2020 election.
I don't know enough about it. I know that there was censorship on that story and other stories that, presumably could have changed people's minds about the election.
And we know the polling demonstrates that now. People have said they would have changed their vote had they been made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story. Isn't that correct?
I am not aware of that, but I'm not surprised.
Mr. Sauer, I want to turn to you. I want your reflection on this form of government censorship, specifically in the 2020 election, as a form of election interference, and what I believe is some of the, most egregious political scandals that, I will live through in my lifetime. Mr. Sauer, what are your reflections?
I strongly agree with your characterization of that form of censorship as election interference. The evidence in our case strongly supports that. It strongly supports, and actually we have judicial findings now, that the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story was done at the instigation of federal officials in the FBI at a very high level of that organization. It was an orchestrated campaign of deception that was anticipatory. It was planned in advance, and it was, I think, consummated with the testimony that I hadn't seen before that's been put up today from Ms. Demlow, characterizing how, at the very end, the FBI then clammed up at the last minute after spending months of seeding the record in these endless, ceaseless meetings with social media platforms about there's a hack and dump coming, it's going to involve Hunter Biden. Then when it actually came, they said, well, no comment. Our judge focused on that particular issue as kind of the coup de grace in this form of election interference.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Mr. Chairman, a point of order.
I have a unanimous consent request.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for unanimous consent.
My majority counterparts have repeatedly cited a district court opinion from Louisiana, and I would like to introduce for the record the Fifth Circuit order staying that opinion almost as soon as it was issued.
Objection. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from...
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
The distinguished gentlelady from New York mentioned a poll. I would just ask that she identify what poll that is, and if we could enter it into the record.
I'm sure she'll be happy
We
to
will
do
submit
that.
it for the record.
Can you identify what it is?
Sure, I will submit it for the record, and you'll be able to review it.
We'll get it.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
I'd like to submit for the record TIP Insights, a New Jersey-based Institute of Policy and Politics poll conducted of over 1,000 adults between August 2nd, August 4th of 2022 showed that 8 in 10 voters, if they were made aware of the Biden laptop, that would have been determinative in changing the outcome of the election. It also demonstrates that 61% of Democrats included in this poll would have changed their vote. Submitted for the record.
Without objection, thank you. The time of the gentleman has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent request.
Gentleman from Louisiana.
There's a lot of talk about this preliminary injunction, so I'd like to enter into the record a 155-page court opinion, the memorandum ruling on a request for preliminary injunction in the matter of State of Missouri and Louisiana v. Biden from the U.S. District Court, Western District, Louisiana, Monroe Division, and also the Fifth Circuit's administrative stay, which does not address the merits. I yield back.
Without objection.
Okay, so what that was about, this guy here, Mr. Sawyer, whatever. He is also vocally challenged. And I want to talk about that because somebody wrote a really stupid comment, and I want to sort of, and hopefully I'll remember to weave that in about Kennedy. But both these witnesses, there's a female witness that she's all about Hunter Biden. She wrote a story for Breitbart. She's not as good. I mean, she's sharp in her way, but she's not as appealing. But this guy's really good. This guy Sora, and this other guy, this senator from Louisiana, Johnson, who they have this epic exchange, and I don't think I have it here, just based in time. But Johnson and this guy have an epic exchange about this court ruling in, let me see if I can find it here, in Louisiana and Missouri. They sued the government for federal government for censoring conservative viewpoints. And this other woman from whatever, Georgia, wherever you saw her, she said that there was a stay on this ruling, trying to negate this ruling, because there was a stay on it to prevent it from having an effect on, the Biden administration to continue doing these behaviors, right? Even though it was ruled in the favor of the plaintiff, right? And this guy Johnson, this guy Sauer talk about in very, documented terms how the Biden administration never went against the merits. That's what he said, the merits just now of the case, which meant that they never said that it was wrong that they were censoring. They just got a stay. And the Democrats are trying to use that stay as, oh, this thing had no merits, the case did, like it was thrown out. But it wasn't thrown out. The plaintiffs won. Louisiana and Missouri won against Biden administration. The Biden administration was successful at getting a stay through the federal government to stop anything from happening on the case, right? But they lost the case. And so that was that about. And the other part, you heard that woman, she had this study that said 60% of Democrats would have voted or not voted for Biden, whether they voted for Trump or not. They wouldn't have voted if they knew about the Hunter Biden laptop. So effectively, that poll says that Trump would have won had the Biden laptop story not been suppressed by the federal government and the social media been censored and mainstream media be censored from covering it, right? Which we saw happen. So the Democrats got rolled. They tried to say these things weren't true, and they were immediately put into record, right? So that part was epic.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz. Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we respectfully requested that you rescind Mr. Kennedy's invitation to appear here due to his repeated and very recent statements that spread dangerous anti-Semitic and anti-Asian conspiracy theories and attempted to move into executive session because House rules prohibit public testimony that degrades or defames people. His reckless rhetoric helped fuel anti-Semitic incidents, which for the record are at the highest level in the United States since 1970. They have nearly tripled in the last 6 years.
So when they first rolled out, they exhumed this corpse, this ghoul. She's repulsive, right? She's repulsive. Like, I usually don't say that on every level. Her voice is repulsive. Her face is repulsive. Her hair is repulsive. And again, just her essence. It's like she was dead for 6 months and woke up in her casket and they let her out and they rolled her into this hearing. Like, that's the energy that she exudes. And so when they exhumed this corpse, on the Gollum scale, like I think of Gollum as the human being degraded into a Gollum-like state. She's like at 8 or 9 out of 10, right? And so, I'm going hard on it. And when I first saw her be exhumed, I thought it was because she was Jewish, and they were using Stacey Plaskett to talk about him being racist. I guess they don't have any Asian people on this committee. So these were the two people that they had. They also have another Jewish guy, maybe 2 other Jewish people that come up and give brief statements. But she and Stacey Plaskett are the stars for the Democrats. And I was like, well, it's just because of they're being used because of their racial and religious demographics, right? But then I realized yesterday that nobody wanted this turd of a case. Nobody wanted to make this case against Kennedy, and they had to stick these 2 people with it. I hope Stacey Plaskett and Marjorie Taylor and Debbie Wasserman Schultz got something out of this. I'm sure they were promised something because nobody wants to throw this turd out there of accusing RFK of being racist and anti-Semitic. They know it's not going to stick. They know it's embarrassing. And they don't have anything else, right? They don't have a case here, and they can't admit they're wrong. And so they just got to go up there and lie with just their classic, narratives, which I've said over and over again. And so she got stuck with this thing, right? So they exhumed this person, but she's the worst person to talk about this because of her failure. And I'll get back into that in a moment. Let's listen to her a little bit more.
Since you gave Mr. Kennedy a megaphone today, I want to give him a chance to correct his statements and prepare some of the harm that he's helped cause. Mr. Kennedy, you're well educated. So yes or no, please. Are you aware that for centuries Jews have been scapegoated and blamed for causing illnesses like Black Plague and more recently COVID?
I am. Those are known as blood libel, and they are one of the worst and most disturbing parts of human history.
Now, this is a losing message from her, but it's also fundamentally dishonest. So what she's trying to do is link Kennedy here and not give him a chance to respond. She tries to ask him yes or no questions throughout this process. But what she's accusing him of saying is that he said that Jewish people were responsible for starting COVID and spreading it. And two things that he didn't say. He didn't say anything like that. What he said was Ashkenazi Jewish people were less likely to die from COVID than other groups. And he said Chinese people as well. The prevailing theory is that this was leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China. So it has nothing to do with Israel and Jewish people. So she's saying something that he didn't even come close to. He didn't hint at, he wasn't adjacent at. He wasn't even adjacent to this idea that Jewish people somehow were responsible for this disease. He said one thing about Jewish people, and that was they were less likely to die from it, based in studies that he had seen. He also made reference to a theory that this could be a genetically targeted bioweapon. But the bioweapon couldn't be developed by both China and Israel because that's not even being floated out there. And he didn't hint at that. He didn't say that that was possible. So the only thing you could say was which he did say, was the United States and the Chinese are developing ethnically targeted bioweapons. So there's nothing anti-Semitic about what he said. And he wasn't doing what she's accusing him of saying that Jewish people were responsible for this virus. He didn't say that. And she's linking him to that. And there's no evidence to support that, right?
Good. I'm glad to know that, of course, that you acknowledge that. Of course, it's true and well documented that this pernicious form of anti-Semitism led to centuries of discrimination, even horrific pogroms and massacres, and it still fuels deadly violence today. Yet last week, you floated a baseless conspiracy theory that the coronavirus was bioengineered to target Caucasians and Black people, but to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people. Mr. Kennedy, your bizarre, unproven claim echoes that same historic slander of labeling Jews and Chinese people as a race, and that Jews, and in this case Chinese people, somehow managed to avoid a deadly illness that targets other groups for death. You do see that, yes or no?
You're misstating.
No.
You are.
I quoted what you said earlier, and it is directly what you said. So just ask me yes or no.
I was describing an NIH-funded study.
No, you didn't cite any.
I was describing an NIH-funded study by Cleveland Clinic scientists.
Reclaiming my time. You did not reference reclaiming my
published
time.
in USC
Mr.
Medical,
Chairman,
which is one.
The time is mine. I'm reclaiming it. Please ask the witness to stop talking.
You asked me a question.
Reclaiming.
Allow me to answer
time.
my question.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like about 10 seconds back.
You are slandering me incorrectly. You're saying is dishonest.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from
Florida.
Florida.
Defend myself.
Mr.
Time belongs
Chairman,
to the gentlelady from Florida.
I'd like 15 seconds back.
We will
Mr.
be happy to
Chairman.
give you that.
Thank you so much. You did not cite any study like you are citing here now during that conversation. You referenced no study at all. You simply labeled Jews and Chinese people as a race, and you also said that somehow they managed to avoid a deadly illness that targets other groups for death.
The key word here is somehow. And he didn't say they avoided it. She's mischaracterizing what he said even then. He said they were less likely to die. But instead of getting into the merit of her argument, which most people are going to see through it, right? Let's get into why she's being used and why she sucks for this and why I said she was repulsive. The reason I said she was repulsive is because they're trying to sell something to the American people. They're trying to sell a narrative against Kennedy particularly. They keep on coming back to Kennedy throughout the process. They don't want to talk about Hunter Biden. They don't want to talk about the Biden administration censoring people. So they're going after Kennedy, which they've gone after Kennedy, social media, right? So Biden pressured social media to deplatform Kennedy and to censor him right off the bat when he was president, before Kennedy even announced. I mean, that's how scared they are of this guy. They figured he might run, and they immediately tried to undermine his future candidacy, right? And they're trying to label him with these things as a way to undermine his candidacy in the future. But they've used somebody here who's unlikable. Does anybody look at Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and I mean Democrats, and not knowing who she was? Like, if you didn't know what her point of view is, if you were a Republican and you realize she was a Republican, you'd be like, ah, man, right? You know, this idea, I said, you know, he with us, right? He with us is what they yell at the sideline, like the opposing team when somebody shoots a three-pointer, to imply that this guy's doing them a favor by shooting, right? He's playing for our team. You're the most valuable player for the other team. That's something we used to say when we were kids, right? You know, to sort of belittle our competitors. You're our most valuable player. You suck so bad. You suck so bad that you're actually playing for the other team. Every time you go out in the field, the other team has an advantage. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz is that guy, right? She, you know, shouldn't be saying anything about anybody else being anti-Semitic because she torpedoed Bernie Sanders' candidacy and allowed Hillary Clinton to run. She single-handedly was in charge of the Democratic failure that was Hillary Clinton and the Trump presidency. She's to blame for the Trump presidency for the Democrats. She was head of the DNC. She's the one who got hacked. Her DNC got hacked. They were broke. They were $12 million in debt because of the Obama campaign. And they, you know, they had to do something to not go out of business. They were ready to go bankrupt. The Democratic Party was ready to go bankrupt. And so Hillary Clinton had tons of money. And she came in and bought the nomination, which, you know, when Debbie Wasserman Schultz was fired in disgrace, right? And they brought in, and this is during the campaign, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was fired July 26th of 2016. So that's about this time, it was 4 days from now, would be the anniversary of this. And it was right before the election. So they had a shoe-in with Hillary Clinton. Everyone thought Hillary Clinton was going to beat Trump. She was polling well. And she had to resign even though they pressured her and were firing her, in disgrace because she mismanaged the DNC. Right? At a time when, you know, they were on the rise because it looked like Hillary Clinton was going to beat Trump, right? And they brought in Donna Brazile, who, when she realized everything that Debbie Wasserman Schultz had failed at, you know, getting hacked, they all say the Russians hacked you, but there's two parts of, you know, the Russians hacking you, that's on the Russians or whatever, some foreign government. But how do you let yourself be hacked? You're the DNC. The Democratic National Committee got hacked, and they're supposed to be running things and supposed to be a part of the national security, and they got hacked, and Podesta got hacked, right? And they all whine about getting hacked like they couldn't do anything about it, right? And so Debbie Wasserman Schultz, you know, the Donna Brazile comes in, and she apologizes to Bernie Sanders in this epic, you know, part of her book. You can find it online. I've read it before. I don't have enough time to read it now. But talks about how they were so broke and so, like, in disarray, they handed the nomination to Hillary Clinton. They gave her the questions before the debates. Like, she had knowledge of the questions before the debates with Bernie Sanders. And they showed how they rigged it. And she had to apologize. Donna Brazile called up and apologized Bernie Sanders. And he said, well, at least is she going to beat Trump? And Donna Brazile said, well, the polling numbers say she is, but there's no enthusiasm at her rallies. And so Debbie Wasserman Schultz was responsible for Trump, which ended up being a boon for the Democrats, even though they say they hate him. But she was a disaster. She failed epically. And she's unlikable. And Bernie Sanders would have been the first Jewish American to run for president as a nominee. He had a chance to be president as a Jewish person, and she sabotaged and rigged it against him. And she's accusing RFK of being anti-Semitic when she took out the Jewish people's best chance at a presidency, right? And like, that's much more anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish, where she actually rigged it against him, right? And the Democrats rigged it against him again this last election, which I've documented and talked about so much in the past, right? In other videos. And so she is repulsive. She's unlikable. And, all these things. And they're rolling her out here, a disgraced person, right? Because no one wants to handle this turd of accusing RFK of something they know he didn't do. This is how bad it is. She's an absolute disaster. Because when you hear her talk, you immediately want to go to the other side. Like, you want it to turn it off, right? The annoying sounds coming from her face, her mannerisms, all of it. Like that exchange with Kennedy. You're just like, make it stop. It's like, somebody erase this character from the show. We can't even, like, it's like so disgusting, right? Which is a word that she's going to use at the end. She's going to call Kennedy disgusting, right? Frankly, it's disgusting. So this is epic right here.
You don't see that? You're trying to rewrite history here. A few months ago, Mr. Kennedy, you compared COVID public health policies to barbaric, murderous tactics of Nazi Germany, saying that Jewish people in Nazi Germany had more freedom than Americans facing COVID health restrictions. In hindsight, Mr. Kennedy, do you reject this absurd and deeply hurtful and harmful comparison, or do you still stand by it?
Congressman, what you are saying is a lie.
That you said it.
I did not. I never continued.
Okay.
I never, ever
Mr. Chairman, I'm
compared
happy to
COVID
answer into the record when Mr.
countermeasures.
Kennedy said that. I reclaim my time. In discussing COVID public health measures, you made light of the genocide against Jewish people by saying, and I quote, even Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps to Switzerland, you could hide in an attic like Anne Frank did. Mr. Kennedy, do you think it was easy for Jewish people to escape systematic slaughter of Nazis, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. Mr. Kennedy, do you think it was just as hard to wear a mask during COVID as it was to hide under floorboards or false walls so you weren't murdered or dragged to a concentration camp? Yes or no?
Excuse me?
That's a question, yes or no?
I didn't hear your question.
Okay. I said, do you think it was just as hard to wear a mask during COVID as it was to hide under floorboards or false walls so you weren't murdered or dragged to a concentration camp?
Of course not. That's
Okay.
ridiculous.
But that's a comparison that you made.
I did
Mr.
not
Kennedy,
make that
were the measures taken to contain the spread and fatalities related to COVID in any way at all comparable to the murder of 6 million Jews, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
When you constantly bring this up as a group, when Jewish people bring up everything's anti-Semitic, we saw this with Kyrie Irving, there's a backlash. And when you use a person who's so unlikable as Debbie Wasserman Schultz to do this, there's going to be a backlash, right? You're creating more anti-Jewish sentiment by doing this because there is legitimate prejudice against Jewish people. I see it all the time. I see it in my comment section. Not as much now as I used to. But there is this level of negativity towards Jewish people. It exists. It's not some myth, right? But every time you, as a Jewish person or as a liberal, bring this up and make this, a thing when it isn't a thing, when you falsely accuse people of this, you undermine any legitimacy to your claim. We saw this with, I'll get into this with Stacey Plaskett, right, in a bit. This is what Jussie Smollett did, which we'll see with Stacey Plaskett. I'll bring that back up then. It actually hurts your claim, right? And that's what's happening here. Like, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, like, if you're going to choose the person that you like more, I would say 90% of people are going to say RFK in this exchange. She's bolstering his campaign. They're supposed to be torpedoing his campaign, and they just gave it a huge boost.
Let's be very clear here. There's no legitimate comparison to the Holocaust. It doesn't matter if you're talking about AI, vaccine mandates, or anything else. There is no comparison. And if this were a slip of the tongue, Mr. Kennedy, or a one-off comment, we would all move on. But there's a deeply disturbing pattern. In 2015, you apologized to all those, quote, whom I offended by my use of the word Holocaust to describe the autism epidemic. When discussing efforts to encourage others to get vaccinated for COVID-19, you said Nazis did that in the camps in World War II. They tested vaccines on gypsies and Jews. That was a quote. Like before, you apologized for invoking the Holocaust, saying, quote, to the extent my remarks caused hurt, I am truly and deeply sorry. These are not real statements of contrition or remorse. They are passive-aggressive non-apologies that blame the listener for reacting to the lie you just spread. I'm deeply saddened that this is a conversation we're having today. I have deep respect for what Mr. Kennedy's family did and still does to make life better for all Americans. But what you are doing now, Mr. Kennedy, and the forces you aligned yourself are reckless, dangerous, and disturbing by echoing dangerous claims such as, quote, Jews don't really suffer as much as we do, which you said. Your rhetoric creates a climate of mistrust, antagonism, and even hatred or violence against Jewish people. My own children have been the targets of brutal anti-Semitism on social media. You fan those flames and jeopardize their safety. You've marginalized other groups too, like Asian Americans and the LGBTQ plus community. And worse, you don't seem to care or brush it all off to misquotes and misunderstanding. Frankly, it's disgusting. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent
The
request.
gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for UC.
I ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record a study that Mr. Kennedy just referenced, new insights into genetic susceptibility of COVID-19. The main body said that they investigated genetic susceptibility to COVID-19 by examining DNA polymorphism in ACE2 and TMPRSS2. Those are receptors for COVID in 81,000 human genomes, and they found unique genetic susceptibility across different populations. I have another document that I'd like to ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
To submit, and this is from the FDA review of efficacy and safety of Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. This is dated December 10th, 2020, and it shows that the Pfizer trial and the USDA broke down the effectiveness of the vaccine into 7 different racial categories because this was also a concern of theirs, and it would frankly be delinquent not to study the effects across the
But
different
Mr.
races.
Kennedy said it was bioengineered to
Without
target,
Time
blacks and
belongs to
Caucasians.
the gentleman from Utah
And
is
spare
recognized for 5
whites,
minutes.
and spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people. That is different
Time
than any of
belongs
those
to the
studies.
gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, claiming my time.
She just got absolutely obliterated. And like I said, if you didn't know what she was saying, if you didn't care about what she was saying or didn't understand it, just her voice and her mannerisms and everything, it's like, make it stop. Like she is the Gollum version of one of those real life housewives from New York or something that somehow now lives in Florida, and they keep on reelecting her, right? You know, there's something repulsive about her. And this guy Massey is one of the stars. He's like really sharp, and I'm going to show you something from him in a bit. Might be coming up now, I don't know, where he talks about natural immunity. The guy from Johnson is really sharp. And the Democrats are putting out these people who are, are just getting ransacked here. Like they're introducing study after study supporting what's being said. And Kennedy has always done this when he talks. And so she's saying that he linked these things. She said that he said it was bioengineered to target certain groups of people and spare others. And he didn't say that. He said there is a case to be made, an argument to be made that this is the case, that he knows that there has been this, and who wouldn't believe that? Like what thinking person wouldn't believe that the governments are making genetically targeted weapons? Because that's, they made the neutron bomb, which that would kill people, but would leave the buildings and infrastructure intact, right? Is it the neutron bomb? It's one of those things. We know what the military and industrial complex is capable of. We know what the kind of monstrous bioweapons they've made, not just here, but around the world. So that's 100% believable. Like that if they could do that, they would do that, right? They would make genetically targeted weapons. And he says he has proof of it. So there's that. The second thing was this a genetically targeted weapon? And the way that you would find that out is to look at the numbers and see if there were certain genetic groups, certain demographics that were less likely to die and get severely sick, and there were some other ones that would more likely die and get severely sick, right? But he's being accused by Debbie Wasserman Schultz of being anti-Semitic because he's saying Jewish people are less likely to get sick. But the other woman, Stacey Plaskett, accuses him by saying that black people are more likely to get to die or get sick, that he's being racist to them because he's encouraging them not to get life-saving vaccines, which we'll get to in a bit, right? And so their arguments are contradictory, right? They're trying to say that both sides of what he's saying is racist. One side is racist and the other side is anti-Semitic.
Mr. Kennedy, you've had some accusations thrown at you today. I'm going to ask my questions briefly and give you a chance to respond to that at the end of my time here. Ms. Wiley, if I could talk to you, and I know maybe you're busy, with something else there, but do you trust the government to determine what facts and views the American people should be exposed to?
I trust that we have a process whereby we can interrogate what we hear and learn from the government, but certainly I expect the government to share facts and information.
That wasn't my question. I didn't say share facts and information. I said, do you trust the government to determine what facts and views the American people should be exposed to and which ones they should not?
Well, I think I'm struggling with the question because that is not the facts of the case in Missouri.
Simple
in
question.
Missouri versus
I'm not talking about
Biden,
Missouri. I'm not talking
which
about
is
Missouri.
what I was here to-
Hey. I'm not talking about Missouri. This is a very simple question. Do you trust the government to determine what facts and views the American people are exposed to?
I am not aware of any action of the government
Okay,
that
I'm gonna
tells the
take that-
American public what facts they should be exposed to.
You're not aware of that?
No, I am not.
Oh my gosh, where have you lived for the last 3 years?
In the United States of
Okay,
America.
let me ask you. China suppresses free speech. Is that a good thing?
No, of course not.
Iran, mullahs there suppress free speech. Is that a good thing?
No, of course not.
Vladimir Putin suppresses. Is that a good thing?
No, we all
So
agree
can we
should not
agree
suppress
then?
free
We
speech.
agree then that the government government leaders should not suppress free speech. Do we agree with that?
That's a different question. Yes, it is unconstitutional
How
for the
is it a
government
di-
to pass laws that would abridge free speech.
Okay,
That's the First
or
Amendment.
not pass laws, but to create pressure that would suppress free speech. They don't. Vladimir Putin doesn't pass a law.
Yes.
He exerts his force and influence to suppress free
Ye-
speech.
Yes, the case law says that the government cannot coerce private entities.
And we agree that's a bad idea, don't we?
Yes, and I would absolutely agree when
We
Donald
agree
Trump,
then the government
when Donald
shouldn't-
Trump
wait,
threatened social
we-
media companies
Hang on,
with
hang on,
federal
hang on,
regulation
hang on.
shutdown, that was coercion.
That's not my question.
Oh, I know, but I think it was consistent to show
Here's
that we
my
agree.
question for you. We agree the government shouldn't be responsible for restricting views that the American people are exposed to. We agree on that, right? You wouldn't answer it at first.
Oh.
So this is Maya Wiley, and she gets absolutely rolled here because she is supposed to be a civil rights activist. Well, this is her bio here. She is an American lawyer, professor, and civil rights activist. She served as president and CEO of the Leadership Conference of Civil and Human Rights since 2022. She also is connected with the ACLU, and she's going to get the ACLU is going to get rolled because their primary job is to protect freedom of speech. And she's on the wrong side of this thing. She should be against censorship, and she is. But she's got to be, her role here is to be anti-free speech. Her role is to be, a shill for the Democrats. And she's put in a horrible position, and she's not good at it. And she constantly gets rolled throughout this process. Later on, she admits, one guy, I'll show you that. There's a wonderful clip coming up. But you can tell that she's struggling because she knows, based on everything that she's supposed to be about, she should be for free speech, right? But because they have to cover up for this turd that's Biden and for this censorship that they've been doing and for the fact that they don't want RFK to go through the democratic process and run against Biden because he'll win and destroy the Democratic Party the way, their power structure. She's got to go up there and shill for something that, based on everything that she's for, she's really against, right? And so it's wonderful. She squirms throughout this whole process.
But it's clear that you do agree with that.
That's
because
a different question.
Okay, so to my question, do you agree with it or not?
I agree that the government should not violate our Constitution.
Do you agree with my question?
Your question is
Should the government
whether or not
determine,
the
this is so simple.
No, it is not so simple.
No, I'm going to ask it
because-
one time, and it is so simple. A 7th grader could understand this question. Should the government be responsible for the views and the facts that the American people are exposed to.
The problem I have is that I don't
Okay,
know
I'm gonna
of
say
any
that- I'm
facts
gonna
in
say
which
that
the
you're unable
government
to-
tells us
I'm
what
going
to
to say that
believe.
you're unable to answer a question, which for me is fairly shocking as an American citizen. Let me ask you now then, having concluded that you're unaware of suppression of free speech in the last several years, what about, for
That's not
example,
actually what I said, but thank you.
do you think it was appropriate for the FBI to pressure private companies to censor and take down posts that the government disagreed with? Was that appropriate? I'll give you an example that you were unaware of. I'm glad you're aware of it now. Was that appropriate for the government to do that?
Sir, the only thing that is appropriate for the government to do is what it is lawfully allowed to do, both under the Constitution and the laws of this country,
Which is?
which is to conduct its criminal investigations appropriately to our laws and to our
So
policy.
they didn't have the ability then to go to these private companies and to say they can't
There are
allow these views to
there are instances in which, in order to protect the integrity of a criminal prosecution, they may ask, sometimes news agencies and others to
Certainly agree with
withhold.
that. Was that the case
Yeah.
here? Was there any criminal prosecutions involved with these cases? Not that I'm
There were
aware of.
criminal investigations are not prosecutions.
Okay, criminal
And also
investigations?
the integrity of criminal.
Were there any criminal investigations regarding these examples?
Which examples are those, sir?
For example, anything regarding the Hunter Biden laptop?
Well, there are lots of things that have been said in public media about Hunter Biden's laptop. There was a criminal investigation, in fact, a plea in that case.
That was after the fact, right? The criminal investigation of the Hunter Biden stuff happened after the fact. The FBI was doing whatever they were doing with it, but that wasn't why they were censoring it, and she knows it, and everybody knows it. See, the Hunter Biden thing is a complete loss for them because they, ran their game in the beginning, knowing that at some point it was going to come out. At some point, and they didn't know about maybe Elon Musk and the things that had to do with Twitter, but they knew at some level the Hunter Biden thing would come out, but they knew it would come out after the election, and that was good enough for them. That at least Magoo would be in the White House. And so they knew this day was coming, right, at some point. And, for the first 2 years, Biden and the Dems held the House and the Senate. And so they knew that this wouldn't be an issue until the Republicans took over one of the bodies, the legislative bodies, or there was a Republican president. But now there is, the Republicans hold the House, and they're getting rolled up here. This woman's just taking it on the chin.
Does it bother you that 51 former intelligence officials made a determination that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, which they admit, by the way, they had no evidence at all that that was true. Zero evidence that that was true. Does that bother you they did that?
What bothers me tremendously is that while there are a lot of things we should be talking about with regard to whether or not the government at times exceeds its authority, that includes whether or not government exceeds its authority when it tries to censor or interfere with research or research institutions, where any White House official, such as Donald Trump, actually threatens.
Wait, did you just bring up Donald Trump? Did you? I forgot about this part. Did you just bring up Donald Trump? She's invoking the Trump card here, right? What bothers me is Donald Trump. Does there anything bother you about Hunter Biden? No, what bothers me is Donald Trump. Trump bothers me. That's the only thing that bothers me is Trump. And anything that Trump used to do when he did it, and he did it back then when he was president. And that's Donald Trump. Like, that's the Trump card, right? It's so hilarious.
Where any White House official, such as Donald Trump, actually threatens the full power of the federal government, including the threat to shut down social media because they put a fact-check label on a tweet.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized.
I'd like to submit for the record TIP Insights, a New Jersey-based Institute of Policy and Politics poll conducted of over 1,000 adults between August 2nd, August 4th of 2022 showed that 8 in 10 voters, if they were made aware of the Biden laptop, that would have been determinative in changing the outcome of the election. It also demonstrates that 61% of Democrats included in this poll would have changed their votes. Submitted for the record.
So I left that in because, for obvious reasons that this is the flow of it, right? So that woman brought up Trump, and this woman brings up how Trump would be president again had it not been for what they did to suppress the Hunter Biden story. So that's the flow of that, right? So kaboom.
I thank the gentleman from Texas. Mr. Kennedy's and others here are claiming that they've been censored, but they actually have a huge megaphone. The rules that my colleague tried to bring up are rules that the Republicans made at the beginning of this Congress. They did not allow the Democrats to be part of that. And one of those rules was that if information or testimony might potentially defame an individual, that we would go in executive session. No one was trying to stop him from testifying, but not to give him the megaphone that this group has allowed him to have. I also note, in terms of censorship, that the far-right media has already issued articles about me playing the race card. The race card is something that's often used against Black people for bringing up when they see race hatred being propagated against them. And it's a means to try and keep us quiet and keep us in our place. Oh, you're playing the race card by bringing up what is obvious in our lives, what is obviously happening, race.
I've covered this in the truth community. I don't know how much, like so much. And I covered it with Jussie Smollett and, with Marjorie Taylor Greene the other day. And I just covered it with Sound of Freedom. And when you bring things up that aren't true or are exaggerated and can be proven to be false, some more obvious than others, there's always a backlash and it hurts your cause, right? So if your cause is to expose racism, but then you make false claims like they're doing against RFK Jr., no one thinks RFK Jr. is racist or anti-Semitic. No one really thinks that. These people don't think that. He said something that they could twist into that narrative, right? And the narrative here for her is that this is what she's saying here. This is what she's about to say here. She said earlier. She said multiple times is that RFK Jr. wants, he's against vaccines publicly, but for them privately. That his family's been fully booped, right? And that his, he had a party and he made all the members, people coming to the party, all the guests, have the boop, right? Even though he claims to be against it. So what she's saying here is that he's telling Black people not to get the boop, not to get the boop. I'm nailing it today. That he's telling Black people not to get it, right? And because of that, there could be a genocide of people, or not genocide, but there could be thousands of casualties, maybe even more, because of his rhetoric. And he's doing this purposely because some part of him wants to wipe out Black people. That he's going out and he's, through his documentary that he made and through other things he said, that he's pushing Black people away from getting the medical care that they need. And he's doing that because he hates Black people. He wants to get rid of them. And nobody believes that, right? That's so, it's such egregious. Nobody believes that he's doing this because he doesn't want Black people to get vaccinated. Come on, no one believes that. That's ridiculous. It's embarrassingly bad. Nobody thinks that this guy is about that. The guy has a career and a family and a tradition. Where did he get his hatred for Black people and Jewish people? Where did he get it from? Why does he hate them so much? This is just something they've made up. And when you make things up like this, then it becomes easy to dismiss any real claims of racism, any real claims of anti-Semitic behavior. I've said this over and over again. So what you're doing is actually hurting the cause that you think you're benefiting. And I say this all the time to people here, Truth Community, you guys know it. It's just there for anybody to see. Sometimes you're actually sabotaging your own cause, and the Democrats are doing this here. and they're sabotaging their cause of trying to prevent Kennedy from winning the nomination, because this thing is playing poorly.
And so you can keep saying I'm race baiting and try and censor me, but I'm going to continue to tell the truth.
So if Kennedy wasn't running for president and they weren't scared of him, they wouldn't care about what he said. They would say it was just kooky conspiracy theories. They wouldn't even say anything. They would ignore him, which they've been doing for years. And so it's only because the Republicans gave him this platform that the Democrats had to come up with a strategy, and this is it. And so for her to say, keep on telling the truth, and that there's people are censoring her by saying that she's race baiting, is just a flat out lie, and it undermines real suffering, like I said before. It undermines real racism. It undermines all these things, right? It makes it easy to dismiss. And so, it's a thankless job. I don't know if she volunteered for this. I doubt it. Maybe she wanted she wanted the notoriety. But if this thing goes south for them, and it's more likely going to, Jojo Magoo probably isn't going to make it to the election the way that it's going. In fact, when I turned on CNN this morning, actually, I think it was a YouTube video. I don't know which. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But that guy Smirkanish or Veshi or whatever guy who's at CNN, the headline was, why isn't President Biden more popular? And it listed all the accomplishments and how America's getting it wrong, and Biden's actually doing a great job. And there are some people who think that, but it's not very many. And, when Biden has to go up there and campaign, and he's going to look bad, look worse, and the Hunter Biden thing is now out there, and, life isn't better without Trump, that the way that they promised it was going to be, it's going to be hard for him not to debate Kennedy or even run for re-election, like I said before. And so this is political suicide for Stacey Plankett and these other people who are grilling Kennedy, right? Because the Kennedy wave is coming in to the Democratic Party, and they're going to be swept up in it.
I want to be abundantly clear about what else is happening in this room. The MAGA Republicans are trying to scare social media companies into not taking down blatantly false information in the lead up to our 2024 presidential election. Chair Jordan knows, as we do, that when conspiracy theories succeed, so does Donald Trump. Russia interfered in our 2016 election, they attempted in our 2020, and they're going to try to interfere in the 2024 presidential election.
So she made three inaccurate statements. She made three lies there. She created three lies. The first one is she repeated her lie about it's the Republicans bullying the social media platforms. And I said this in my last video. The social media giants had to be pressured into taking down so-called conspiracy theories and other things. Those platforms were making money from it. There was a Netflix doc trying to sabotage and, trying to undermine them doing that. The Netflix documentary is about how they were using, the worst kind of information to keep people on their site, including these so-called conspiracy theories. The second thing is about Russian interference. Now, first of all, America has not only interfered with elections, but has done straight up regime change, right? But what happened was, and this is about control and controllers. They're trying to control something they can't control. When Hillary lost the election, they were stunned. And they knew it was because of social media. They knew that they had the mainstream media wrapped up, and Fox was only lukewarm endorsement of Trump, right? Like, they weren't really into Trump. And so everyone thought she was going to win. The polling data came in, she was going to win. She had more money, 2-to-1 money. She had a better ground game. She had better name recognition. Trump was obnoxious, and people hated him already. He came in with a, sort of a negative approval rating. It just got worse as he campaigned. He was very divisive, and he provoked the left. And they thought Hillary would have a shoo-in. And so when she didn't, they created this term fake news. And they blamed it on Russia Today. I talked about that joint report from the NSA. I'm not going to repeat all these things here. But they came out and said there was this hacker named Gru and all this stuff in Russia Today. And none of that stuff had any real effect on the election compared to, Hillary's overwhelming advantage in terms of the mainstream media and the rest of it. But then the mainstream media realized they were going to lose to the internet. And so they can't compete because their content isn't nearly as interesting and compelling. And so they had to rein that in. And they did it in a whole slew of ways, trying to pressure social media to censor opinions that weren't endorsed by the mainstream narrative, mainstream media, and the left-leaning government and the rest of it. So they're the ones who are bullying. They're the ones who are causing the problem. They're not letting things flow. They're not letting the free market decide. They're not letting you decide, giving you all the information, letting you decide. They're saying, no, we got to tell you what to think. Right? And so there's nothing more oppressive. I mean, she's talking about, all these things about racism, anti-Semitism, all these things, which is oppressive in nature, and they're being oppressive. I say this all the time. The behaviors are the same. And it's worse when you come from a group that's been oppressed, when you get power, and that's what's happened with the left. And the third thing that she brought up was Trump. Like, they can't help but talk about him, right? But this is about Kennedy, because Kennedy is a far bigger threat to them. Remember, he has a higher approval rating, and right now people think he can't win or that Jojo Magoo's the incumbent, but that's going to disappear shortly. And when it does disappear, whatever way it disappears, Kennedy is the most logical and reasonable choice.
We note that Russian trolls sought to suppress the black vote by unleashing a torrent of social media posts designed to stoke racial tensions and spread incorrect voting information. In 2021, our national intelligence agencies found that proactive information sharing between the government and social media companies facilitated the expeditious review and, in many cases, removal of social media accounts covertly operated by Russia and Iran. Ms. Wiley, if the government is not able to proactively share information with social media companies in 2024, what is likely to have be the ramifications? And I'd ask that you make your answer as succinct as possible, because there's a lot of information I need.
I will just quote one thing. Mr. Prigozhin, who's been in the news of late, actually said explicitly and openly that they would continue to try to spread mis and disinformation into the United States and interfere with our elections.
Thank you. They know that Russian interference, that is, the MAGA Republicans know that Trump benefits when Russia interferes.
The majority of people are not worried about Russia or anybody hacking the election. This is a Democratic complaint, right? Anybody can interfere, anybody. I mean, there's all dirty tricks, and it is whatever it is, right? But they are so into controlling the outcome. And, corporations and foreign governments give money to, all the pharmaceutical companies have dumped a ton of money into the campaign, and it's affecting everything, the policies and all these things. They're not concerned about that, right? It's just a complete lie.
The super PAC that supports, the same super PAC that supports Mr. Kennedy and has raised significant funds on his behalf is run by a man named Jason Bowles. Here's Jason Bowles' Twitter profile, as you can see up on the screen. Jason Bowles isn't just a MAGA supporter. He also ran the super PAC for MAGA Republicans Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, George Santos, and in 2022, he supported Herschel Walker. So the person behind Mr. Kennedy's super PAC is an individual who personally and professionally wants the Republican Party to succeed. Yet, Mr. Kennedy is running as a Democrat.
There's lots of reasons I want to show you all this, but this is the number one. Because at the very end of this hearing, and this was something I was going to cover until my wife and I watched the back half of the hearing together yesterday. And so what happened here was, what happens at the end is Kennedy doesn't even know what this super PAC is. He hasn't heard of it. And, they're saying that he's a part of this because they've just been looking for dirt on him, right? Once Kennedy said once that they were going to allow Kennedy to testify, they went through every, bit of data, every bit of, video, everything that Kennedy said, everything that's happened. They have all these staffers and anything he's connected to make their case against him. Because this has nothing to do with censorship. This guy, whatever his name, Bowles or whatever it is, he's has nothing to do with censorship, right? This is trying to smear Kennedy and undermine his candidacy against Biden. And so later on, Kennedy's going to hear from Kucinich, his campaign manager, who was also sort of a semi-truther Democrat years and years ago. And Kucinich is going to tell him what this is about. And Kennedy's going to try to talk at the end of the hearing, but Stacey Blanchett is going to get really shitty. And it's embarrassing for her. It's great. It's a great moment between her and Jordan and Kennedy. So this is what that's about. I think he's going to address it here at some point because she's going to ask him a question. And then he's going to figure out what it's about. He's going to address it later on. And all these things that they're throwing at him are things he didn't even know about, or they're misquoting or misinterpreting what he said. And they have nothing. They have a big nothing burger here. Right?
Ms. Wiley, will it benefit Mr. Kennedy as well as the other individuals that are supported by the Super PAC if social media companies are less able to detect and, if needed, if they determine that it's needed, to remove Russian covert information designed to suppress votes in this country?
It is possible.
Thank you. I yield back.
You guys all know this. The truth community is massive. It makes up Americans. Whatever you want to categorize the truth community. And when you talk about people who don't believe in the official story, that believe the media's lying to them, the government's lying to them, and they seek information online, it's massive. And there's so many people posted on social media, whether it be YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or some, other smaller site, any of these other sites or whatever, Rumble, whatever it is, that, the Russian part of that is very small. Right? Whatever Russia's doing, it's very small. And they want to censor all of us so that they can protect against the Russians, right? Like, they're so weak and lame.
Can I yield the remainder of the time?
Lady yields back. I now recognize Mr. Stubbe from Florida for his 5 minutes.
Mr. Kennedy, do you want to respond to that? Can you do that quickly?
Yeah, I've never heard of Mr. Bowles, and I've never heard of that super PAC. This is typical of the accusations against me at this hearing. They are baseless, every single one. I've been subjected to a parade of defamations. If I believe those things about myself, I wouldn't want to hear me either. And want to gag me and lock me in a room somewhere. But none of those are true. And
So the super PAC thing, it's going to be epic. That's coming up. This is what they're addressing here. And I want to read this one comment about Kennedy's voice, but what he's saying here is, all these things are baseless, which I think, they're just grasping at straws. It shows you how desperate the Democrats are. I mean, they're in such a fragile position. Like, they know that they're either going to get Trump or Kennedy, and maybe both. Like, maybe they'll get, I don't know how it's going to work out, right? Trump and Kennedy aren't going to run together. That would be a disaster. But this is what one of my viewers said about. They said RFK is a robot, and somebody commented robot clone. This is the scraping the bottom barrel of the truth community, in terms of reality based. And the person responds, I can't stand how the dude talks, like a malfunction robot. I get he had a stroke or whatever, but it's weird. And he does some weird boop with his eyes like he's a blind man or a Jedi Knight. That's not a robot. There's nothing robotic about him. He's had whatever it was, I forget the name of the disease. It would be better if he didn't have it, but, in life, he's got a handicap, basically. And, he doesn't have a great speaking voice. That's what you have to live with, right? Nothing comes cleanly. But to say he's a robot, it's just like stupid. It's the opposite of that, right? It's not a malfunctioning robot. It's a human being who's struggling with his voice. And this other guy who's testifying, he's sharp as well, but he has trouble talking. And anybody who makes their living talking a lot, like me, for example, you're in a constant battle trying to keep your voice. I mean, people who sing or whatever. It's not like it, sometimes it doesn't perform like you like. And so, you just need to give them a break. Like, be generous, given all the other aspects of it. I mean, it's just, that's where you're gonna roll off the bandwagon.
they were all of this parade of accusations and defamations were made against me in a way that was calculated to make sure that I could not respond to any of them. Every one of them I'd like to respond to, but I was not allowed to.
To further the disinformation going on, Ms. Wiley, in a response to a question, you stated that the decision in Missouri v. Biden was vacated by the appellate court. Is that correct?
I did, and I want to correct that because Mr. Sauer is right. The appropriate word is stayed.
Administratively stayed. So it hasn't been vacated
Stayed.
or dismissed like Mrs. Sanchez
It's
said.
stayed, which means it cannot be implemented right now.
Okay, because I didn't want us to censor your disinformation that you stated as a factual assertion earlier. So
Kaboom! Kablowie. I didn't want to censor your disinformation that you stated factually earlier. And that's what I talked about, that the Democrats were saying that this was vacated and it wasn't a legitimate ruling, but the Democrats never put up a defense. They just got a stay to make it, not legitimate, for that period of time, right? It's a period of time where they, it's like they've been given a, 6-month period to get their boop together or whatever it is, right? And so the Democrats are getting rolled here, like hard.
Did misspeak, and I apologize.
thank you for clarifying that for us. And to talk about more evidence about, I think it's interesting. There's a lot in this opinion, and I just, I have limited time, but I think illustrating some of the actions that the Biden administration took to censor speech is very important. I'm going to read specifically from the opinion. Explicit threats are an obvious form of coercion, but not all coercion needs be explicit. I'm on page 97 of the opinion. The following illustrative specific actions by defendants are examples of coercion exercised by the White House defendants. A, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. Please remove this count immediately. Sounds like a directive from the White House to me to social media companies. Accuse Facebook of causing political violence by failing to censor false COVID-19 claims. F, this is exactly why I want to know what reduction actually looks like. If reduction means pumping our most vaccine-hesitant audience with Tucker Carlson saying it does not work, then I'm not sure it's reduction, implying that they're reducing the information on that. Questioning how the Tucker Carlson video had been demoted since there were 40,000 shares. Wanting to know why Alex Berenson had not been kicked off Twitter because Berenson was the epicenter of disinformation and radiated outward to the persuadable public. And I'm just skipping through here. I'm not even going through all these. Flatteringly stated, not to sound like a broken record, but how much content is being demoted.
So again, this is Louisiana and Missouri, I believe, Mississippi or Missouri, and they sued the federal government. And they, this was I don't know if this was a federal court or state court, but they had all this information about the Biden administration bullying social media and forcing them to take out various information. The Republicans are bought by Big Pharma too, but a lot of it had to do with the bloop, right? And so we know about it. We all experienced this, right? And they were complaining. They were getting censored, and it still wasn't working, right? They were censoring all of us, and it still wasn't working. And this is their little whiny complaints, and the court ruled against them, and now they have a stay on that ruling. But it's been, it's been legally, it's gone through the court system, and Supreme Court isn't going to disagree with this, right? Unless they're, bought and paid for by the Big Pharma, but everything else, they're not going to disagree with it. The Biden administration got involved and was doing violations of the First Amendment. It's like a slam dunk. You got nothing.
And how effective are you at mitigating reach and how quickly? Flattery told Facebook, are you guys effing serious? I want an answer on what happened here and I want it today. Sounds like a pretty explicit threat to me. Letter M, White House Press Secretary Psaki stated, and I quote, we are in regular touch with these social media platforms, and those engagements typically happen through members of our senior staff, but also members of our COVID-19 team. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation. Psaki also stated, one of the White House asks of social media companies was to create a robust enforcement strategy. Oh, Psaki stated on the February 1st, 2022 White House press conference that the White House wanted every social media platform to do more to call out misinformation and disinformation and to uplift accurate information. Another one, hey folks, wanted to flag the below tweet and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process of having it removed ASAP. Sounds like a pretty explicit demand from the White House to me. Again, quoting the opinion. These actions are just a few examples of the unrelenting pressure the defendants exerted against social media companies. This court finds the above examples demonstrate that plaintiffs can likely prove the White House defendants engaged in coercion to induce social media companies to suppress free speech. Mr. Sauer, in the limited time that I have, can you just comment further on, these are just some of the highlights that are in the opinion, and illustrate to us all of the evidence of the White House censoring the American public and working with social media companies to accomplish that?
It's very telling that the judicial findings are quite specific on the specific threats. So there's several ways you can violate the First Amendment if you're a government official. One is coercion, one is significant encouragement, one is joint participation, where you've insinuated yourselves into private decision-making. The court found all of those present here. And with respect to those White House communications, there's a series of specific judicial findings that these statements were threatening. They were threatening adverse legal consequences. There's multiple findings, for example, that White House spokesperson Psaki's public statements explicitly linked the threat of adverse legal consequences to the White House's demands for censorship, which we didn't know at the time but now know were being very aggressively peppered on the social media platforms while she was making those public statements. So you have public statements from the White House. Also, White House Communications Director Bedingfield, there's a very specific judicial finding on that. Threatening adverse legal consequences in public if there's not greater censorship, and in private you've got Rob Flaherty, Andy Slavitt, other White House officials saying, take this down, do more to take down borderline content.
We know this to be true. We live this, right? This section, that section right there is all you needed to know. And I'm not blaming the Democrats specifically for not admitting they're wrong, because the Republicans don't do this as well. A hearing like this, they're not going to come in. You know, they backed Trump on all his, Trump did a lot of seedy stuff, right? And they went along with it. They would, they suck too. But the Democrats, the only thing they could really do here is say, yeah, we're wrong, or we got caught. Sorry, we won't do it again. Right? Like, that's really the only honorable thing to do. Of course, there's no honor, there's no integrity, there's no ethics, but that's the right thing to do. But they're not doing that. They're attacking Kennedy and trying to create some false argument that he's racist and anti-Semitic. It's only going to help him because they look really bad here. And again, America's dumbed down. I don't know how many people watch this or whatever it is. But, it's pretty clear who won this thing, right? And at the end is classic. The guy Massey gets into it, and I'll show you that part. I think I have that part here. And then the very ending is just wonderful. I'm already over 2 hours in, but it's worth seeing. So first, this Democrat is talking about Comey here. He brought up Comey. Is there any ghoul they won't exhume, right?
About whether it affected the election, because we're not hearing a lot about Jim Comey, although one of my colleagues did say that he interfered in the 2016 election, and that is correct. He interfered on behalf of Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton by unnecessarily announcing an investigation 6 days before. The majority would like us to believe that there's some broad government conspiracy, but in reality, this government is playing by the book. That is why Joe Biden's Justice Department has allowed a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney to continue his investigation of the president's son, which is in direct contrast to what the former president did by weaponizing the Justice Department. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes himself. Hard evidence. Mr. Johnson said that we're not only witnesses to censorship, we were victims. The Republican website on the House Judiciary Committee posted this story, and it was limited where it could go. You got to, they exercise censorship of the House Judiciary Republican account, for goodness sake. Ms. Wiley, you were a lawyer for the ACLU?
I was.
Mr. Kennedy, I remember when the ACLU defended they were the champions of the First Amendment. You remember that? You remember that, ACLU?
I remember when the ACLU represented Nazis who they were appalled by.
Appalled, disgusted
right.
by, and yet they would defend the crazy things they said, right? That's how much the First Amendment meant to them, right?
Exactly.
Kazamo, right? So this woman who's definitely bumming, like she got like yanked into this thing, and the ACLU, it's their number one thing is supposed to be defending the First Amendment rights, and it was usually for people of color and oppressed people, and this is back when the conservatives controlled everything, but now they have power. The left has power. These marginalized groups have power. And they want to censor, which is, what I was saying earlier, is kind of worse. Because when you've been oppressed and you've exhibited these behaviors and you're saying, okay, I can't wait till I get power, so once the boot is off my throat, I can't wait to put the boot on the throat of the other side. And that's what's happened here with the Democrats and the liberals and the hippies and all these people, the boomer hippies. And it's deplorable because what they're saying is abuse is okay as long as it's us who are doing the abusing. And, that's people who said that they suffered abuse, and they did suffer, and now they're imposing this on other people. And so that was a huge statement there, right? That they have an ACLU lawyer who's coming in, and she's the witness for this smear on Kennedy. And like Kennedy said, they framed everything where they didn't give him a chance to respond. But in a debate, he gets to respond. And on social media, he gets to respond. And they got this turd, right? This is a giant turd. And this woman's having to eat it the whole time, right? This woman for the ACLU. And she's not comfortable doing it. But, like she'll get slammed if she gives the Republicans and Kennedy anything, any kind of positive whatever. And, and other than that, she has to go against everything the ACLU and the civil rights, whatever she does in terms of her job. She's a CEO of some civil rights organization. And so she's she's just like squirming in her seat.
I want to go back to where Mr. Stubbe was. I want to talk about this hard evidence that Mr. Goldman says doesn't exist. I want to read from the facts. This is what the White House was saying. I want to go to just 3 statements. One, cannot stress this is statements from the Biden White House to social media, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. Please remove this account immediately. Same kind of thing they put on yours, remove ASAP. But here's the better one. Here's the better one. Mr. Flaherty, who ran this COVID operation misinformation concept at the White House, Mr. Flaherty said this, not to sound like a broken record, how much content is being demoted and how effective are you at mitigating reach and how quickly? And we should just translate that because this is real simple. How much censorship are you doing How much censorship are you doing and how quickly are you doing it? But I think the kicker is what Jen Psaki, the press secretary, said back in 2021. Look at this. Now think about this. The press secretary, we're talking about the White House, considered the center of freedom on the planet. The press secretary in the press room says this: we are in regular touch with these social media platforms, and those engagements typically happen through members of our senior staff, but also members of our COVID-19 team. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation, their definition, of course. Psaki also stated one of the White House asks was of social media companies to create a robust enforcement strategy. So you got the press secretary in the press room in the White House saying we're going to limit the press. Now that is frightening. That is frightening. And Ms. Wiley from the ACLU, lawyer with the ACLU, thinks that's somehow appropriate. We know it's not. And their number one target, Mr. Kennedy, was you, a Democrat, their primary opponent. I find that amazing. And I would like any thoughts you may have on, because here's the scary thing, and Dennis and I had this conversation a while back. If you don't have a robust First Amendment, if you try to restrict what the people say and what the press reports, that is a scary place to go. Because if you can't have debate and work out our differences, like you said in your amazing opening statement, let's work together, let's figure this out. But if you can't have that robust debate and figure things out, the alternative is scary. And that's exactly where we're headed. And I would encourage everyone to read Mr. Kennedy's written statement. I read it this morning. Amazing. He walks through the history here. That is what's at stake, and that's why what you're doing, whether we agree with what you say or not, and I disagree with what you said last week, what they played. I think a lot of people did. You've clarified it, but it's about protecting the Constitution and the First Amendment. I'll give you the last minute and a half, Mr. Kennedy.
Well, you know, what I would say is that the founders of and the framers of our Constitution knew that democracy was a very inefficient system, and it had all of these built-in inefficiencies and difficulties. They said that they felt that it would give us the one thing that would give us an advantage over totalitarian systems was this capacity for the free flow of information and a complete lack of control of debate, so that ideas that would eventually mature into policies would be annealed in a furnace of debate and then rise through the marketplace of ideas rather than being dictated from above. And that's what would give the energy, the vibrancy, the vigor to democracy. When they invented this democracy, we were the first one in the modern era in 1780. 1865, 5 other nations had imitated us. Today, it's 190 nations based upon our system. We are supposed to be the exemplary democracy, and the corner foundation stone of our system is freedom of speech. All of the other freedoms depend on it. If we lose that, not only do we lose our democracy in this country, but the entire world loses us as an example.
So this is a huge statement here. And what he said was, when the founders put together, again, these guys are Freemasons and all these things. I'm not a big democracy person. I don't believe in democracy, but I certainly don't believe in totalitarian governments and any kind of kingdom. There has to be something better, right? But people are limited. But what he said was, when you have a totalitarian state and you don't have freedom of choice as much, you don't have freedom of expression, it has numerous advantages, because a lot of energy doesn't go into protests and people complaining and people, whatever it is, right? That everybody works like you see in China or some of these other countries when they're pressured by fear and by temptation, or mostly fear, and they're pressured and forced to just do what they're forced to do, go along with the system, and they can't question it. There are certain advantages. But what the founders said and what Kennedy said here, which I agree with, when you have free flow of information, because the ruling class gets crazy, they lose touch with a normal human life, which we've seen. They lose their ability for creative force, and they just they become indulgent and entitled. But people on the bottom are hungry, and they come up with innovative ideas, and they change things. And so when you have a free flow of information, instead of a top-down system where they impose what you believe, where you are, as opposed to a free flow of information where you get to at least verbalize your opinions, good ideas can rise to the top. And we've seen that, because our stuff here is so much better than mainstream media. And nobody's really questioning that. We know that they know this because mainstream media has adopted many of our ways of doing things. They've adopted our formats. They've adopted so many different things that have come out of social media and the truth community. They've even copied names like reality, the reality check, which was Ben Swan's reality check is now a reality check on CNN. They just stole it. They just absolutely stole it. And you watch those, like anything with Donnie O'Sullivan, and on MSNBC, they got their own guys. Any of them that are anti-conspiracy theorists, they use the same techniques, right? But they suck. They're not as good at it. And so we know that the free flow of information, so many amazing things have happened on the internet, so much entertainment, and it's changed for the better society in different ways, and the creative process. And now they're trying to close that down because they can't control it, and it's embarrassing.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. Now I recognize the gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman, state a request.
Ask for unanimous consent to enter the record an article by the New York Times on July the 20th, 2023. New York Post published Hunter Biden report amid newsroom doubts. Ask for unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Some things amaze me. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized, and this will be our last line of questioning.
One of the immutable and undeniable tenets of immunology is natural immunity. But for 2 years, it was denied. It wasn't even just denied, it was censored. Mr. Sauer, I noticed in the court ruling, in the case that you worked on, that they said that, the court said that Facebook reported to the White House that it labeled and demoted posts suggesting natural immunity to a COVID-19 infection is superior to vaccine immunity. Is that true? Was that kind of censorship going on?
Yes, that kind of censorship was going on, and there were direct communications between the platforms and federal officials about natural immunity specifically that I think you've correctly quoted.
So I experienced this. I didn't get the boop. I was, I knew I wasn't going to get it before it even came out. And my kids didn't get the, they were all unbooped. Boop, right? And so, it's something where I already knew about this. And I already knew about alternative health, and I knew the allopathic medical system doesn't work for me. It hasn't really worked for me my whole life. There are times I have some things that have worked. I've taken antibiotics, they've worked, other things. But there's lots of things in the allopathic medical community that have negative effects and make things worse and not better. And so I got COVID 3 times. And natural healing techniques and natural immunity is what I used. I mean, they were over a year apart, right? Or whatever it was timing-wise. And so, I know about it, and I didn't need it. I didn't need the whatever they had to, I didn't need the boo, and I couldn't talk about it. And when I tried to talk about what I used, I got censored. I got community guideline strike. Just talking about what was effective for me. And I said, look, I'm not recommending anything. I'm not a medical person. And even then I got censored. We knew this was happening. And it was wrong because not everybody, it wasn't some one-size-fits-all type of thing. Allopathic medicine is different. People have different constitutions. And allopathic medicine is, like I said, it's like a hammer. It's very aggressive. And for subtle people or people who are more sensitive or whatever it might be, as you evolve and you start, just in terms of the food itself, the food that they, fast foods. I say this all the time. The mainstream medical community and Fauci and these other people, if they really cared about your health, they would outlaw all the carcinogens. There's people walking through supermarkets with carts full of cancer and heart disease. The number 1 and number 2 killers are heart disease and cancer. And there are people walking through your Walmart or your Kroger or whatever it is, right? Your Piggly Wiggly. And their carts are just full of cancer. And it's even worse at the fast food restaurants. And you see these obese people with their obese kids, and they have these carts full of death, and nobody's stopping that stuff from being produced, and they're not even trying to get people to stop eating it. And so if they cared about your health, they wouldn't allow that. But that cancer cart, that those disease carts, those heart attack carts, are great for the pharmaceutical company and the medical community because you're going to be chronically sick for your whole life. And so we know they're full of boop, right?
And thanks to the Twitter files, we found out that the former FDA director who was on the board of Pfizer, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, wrote on August 27th, 2021, to Twitter executive Todd O'Boyle, who, by the way, was kind of one of the go-to people for the White House also to coordinate with when they wanted something suppressed, requested Twitter take action against a post about natural immunity. What's amazing to me is Scott Gottlieb, who works for Pfizer, who's a former FDA director, went to Twitter the day I got censored on natural immunity, my post, a congressional post. Now, the other side said, well, your tweet's still up, your post is still up. What do you mean you're getting censored? What they did is they labeled it, and they denied anybody's ability to actually comment on it, and they deboosted it. So I simply said natural immunity is better than vaccine immunity. We had studies showing that. They took it, they censored it. So the next day I tried it again with a reference to Bloomberg, hardly a right-wing outlet or conspiracy generator, and they censored that one as well. This is astounding to me. Mr. Kennedy, can you talk about the censorship, the effort of the White House and pharma to suppress the acknowledgement of natural immunity and why they might have been doing that?
Well, again, there was an effort to suppress information, not, in fact, if you read the Twitter files and the email correspondence between Facebook and the White House, there was an acknowledgement that they were being asked and they were complying with censoring information that everybody knew to be true or highly likely to be true. The purpose, and in fact, the term misinformation did not denote falsehood or veracity. Rather, it was a euphemism for any information that departed from government orthodoxies. And it is very dangerous. And, you know, the congressman a minute ago said 1 million people have died because of misinformation about vaccines in this country. But in fact, our country had had one of the highest vaccination rates in the world and the worst health outcomes. We have 4.2% of the global population. We had 16% of the COVID deaths. Blacks in Haiti with a 1% vaccination rate were dying at a rate of 15 per million population. And same in Nigeria, had a 1.3 vaccination rate. They were dying at 1 in 14 per million population. 14 per million population. In our country, blacks were dying at 3,000 per million population, 200 times the death rates in other countries. And this holds throughout the world.
So what's important about this is Stacey Plankett, or whatever her name is, comes from an island. She comes from Virgin Islands. Haiti is, closer to Florida. But, it's along that string of islands. I lived in the Virgin Islands for a while, for about 3 months or 4 months or something like that. And it kind of sucked. It was after a hurricane. I've told this story multiple times in my Journey series. But what she's accusing Kennedy of is that he's trying to commit genocide on African Americans by recommending they don't get the the vax. And what he's saying here, if his statistics are correct, then other genetically similar people, Haiti and I think he said Africa somewhere, got a lower vaccination rate and they were far less likely to die. And so she's saying by Kennedy persuading black people not to get the vax, he was killing them. And that, based on what he's saying here, isn't true, right? And so, again, I don't have the data, right? But this is what he's saying. And to me, he's far more credible and believable.
We needed information. We should have all been sharing information openly and talking to the 15 million doctors through the internet who were treating patients on the front line all over the world and channeling the best therapies, the most successful treatments, so that we can all figure it out. This is not a time in a pandemic I'll just say this one thing. Trusting the experts is not a function of science. It's not a function of democracy. It's a function of religion and totalitarianism, and it does not make for a healthier population.
Let me ask you this. You referenced your father and your uncle and the party that they were in. What has happened to your party with respect to the First Amendment? Would they recognize the position now?
I think, listen, I'm a Democrat, and I believe in if you went through a checklist of all of the things that my father believed in, that he fought for, that my uncle believed in and fought for, I would check every box. I feel my party has departed from some of those core values, and one of the reasons that I want to run for president is to reclaim my party for those. But it's got to, listen, this is not a partisan issue. The First Amendment, it just seems crazy to me that anybody thinks that it's okay to censor, and there's a lot of information that I don't like. There's hateful information, but as the chairman was saying, In 1977, the ACLU went out and supported Nazis who were walking through a Jewish neighborhood in Skokie, Illinois. And they said, that's important. We hate what they're saying. We're repulsed by it. But we cannot survive as a democracy if we are not ready to die for the right for even people who are appalling to speak. The democracy won't work. Unfortunately, there's no other way to control it but through the First Amendment and free speech.
Amen, and thank you for those comments.
So we're almost done here. And I'm going to let the whole thing play out with Jordan and Stacey Blanchett, and you're going to see Kennedy come back from the bathroom, and Kucinich talk to him and tell him about this super PAC. I'll play the super PAC thing again that she said. We'll replay that. I have a little clip, so I might as well show it to you here. But I just want to say this one thing about what Kennedy just said. And so it isn't that the Democrats don't have confidence in your ability or my ability to have all the information. And, it's not just the Democrats. They're the ones on this side, because the Republicans are about control as well. But, they're able to take this other side. And then, there's the controllers that are managing this whole thing, right? The left-right paradigm. But in this, it isn't that the controllers don't have confidence we'll make the right decision. They have confidence that people, despite all of our limitations and our stupidities, when we see two things up against each other, one being truth and one being a deception, that even with how bad people are and how messed up people are and the idiocracy that's taken place, we'll gravitate to truth. We'll gravitate to truth. I mean, that's just the way it is. So they have to game the system. And if that happens, we gravitate towards truth, the system collapses. So let's wrap this up. I'll show you the Stacey Blanchett thing that she said, and then this epic exchange between the three of them.
Mr. Chair, I'd like unanimous consent to enter into the record an article that states RFK Jr. Super PAC has deep ties to Marjorie Taylor Greene, George Santos, which discusses the Super PAC titled Heal the Divide, which states that only Robert F. Kennedy Jr. can unite the nation and start healing America, and also discusses Mr. Kennedy's discussions with Mr. Trump about working in his administration.
Without objection, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, I believe is the time the gentleman has expired. Ranking Mayor, I have one other question I could ask, but I would first give you a chance to ask the question if you had. I just have one quick question for Mr. Kennedy. But I want to be fair. If you got an extra question you want to ask Ms. Wiley or any of the witnesses, I'll turn to you first.
Wasn't prepared for that, so
Well,
if
I'm
you
sorry.
just give me a second.
I thought I was going to get 15 seconds from Mr. Massey, but we weren't able to do that.
Sure. Thank you, sir. I did want to ask Ms. Wiley regarding, we had a discussion and it was brought up by one of the witnesses related to the website Gab. And if you could tell us, it seems to me that while Mr. Kennedy is here, he claims to have been censored, but in reality, his group Children's Health Defense has been allowed to say whatever they want on Gab. Can you share what Gab is?
Gab is an online community that it explicitly states that it wants to create a Christian political economy, and it is a space where researchers have identified a massive influx of extremist and also explicitly anti-Semitic engagement and behavior. Not saying that's about everyone who participates, but that has been documented. And as I stated earlier, the convicted murderer in the Tree of Life massacre actually spent a lot of time on that, and it was deplatformed because it was not adhering to some of the social media policies about identifying that kind of speech.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.
She's basically saying there, as part of that, part of their agenda was to say that there are other social media platforms that are available, but the big ones are the most important. They have the most reach. they're monetized. I mean, there's all these things, right? I mean, it's just a joke to say, well, you're not censored because you have places you can talk. Well, yeah, but you guys are censoring the big ones and you're doing it on purpose.
Actually, I'm going to let Mr. Johnson have our 1 minute here, but I think he wants to wait for Mr. Kennedy to.
Well, I can be asking of Mr. Sauer.
Okay.
I'm sorry that Mr. Goldman left because we talked a lot about evidence. Isn't it true in your litigation, Missouri v. Biden, that Elvis Chan, who was one of the FBI agents in charge of the FBI online censorship program, testified under oath in the litigation, and the court noted it in the opinion, that he had a 50% success rate. In other words, when the FBI brought to the social media platforms content or posts that they said was, disfavored speech for whatever reason, 50% of it was taken down. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
And is there any other glaring piece of evidence that Mr. Goldman might have missed in his review of that outcome, if we've got a second or two here?
There's so much evidence, I couldn't possibly summarize it all. 82 pages of factual findings, tens of thousands of pages of emails and other documents, 6 full-length depositions. And, I just quote what the U.S. Department of Justice attorney said at oral argument in front of Judge Doty on May 26. He said, how can I be sure that this won't happen again? And she answered, it's not the government's position that this will never happen again.
To be fair, I'm out of time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. We appreciate the work you're doing to defend the First Amendment, and thank you for just very compelling answers and compelling testimony and the work you've done and how important this is for the country. I mean, if we don't have a First Amendment, it's just, I'm frightened by where we go.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
You may not, you may not.
I just
Mr.
want to
Chair.
respond.
Mr. Chair, the time is out, we're done.
I haven't adjourned the hearing, and I don't think you're the chair.
Mr. Chair,
Chairman's discretion.
I know it's your discretion,
We're going
but
to let Mr. Kennedy.
he has had so much additional time.
Well, I think everyone's had
Why?
additional time. and
Why? Why are you doing that specifically for him?
Because
I
we
just
don't
want
believe
to
to other
explain
people.
I'm sure the witness,
super PAC.
I'm sure the
On
Democrat
other
witness will be
places.
as short as he possibly can.
No. Are you going to allow our witness to just give another piece?
No, let him address the defamatory comment that was made
address-
about him. That's untrue.
That was not defamatory. That is a legal definition that was not met.
I want to acknowledge
it my-
information about the super PAC that you mentioned.
Go ahead.
I've just been told that super PAC is connected to somebody that we have a connection to. It's not a super PAC that I've endorsed, and it's not one, as I said, that I've ever heard of.
Thank the gentleman for that statement, and I thank you for your testimony. The committee is now adjourned.
This is almost 3 hours. I need to wrap it up. But she came across, I mean, it just sucks the way that she came across there at the end. Just petty. I mean, you guys they got your you lost. You got destroyed in this thing. And they knew they were going to get destroyed because there's so much evidence on the other side. Biden administration, the FBI, these groups have all censored people in the truth community, people on the left, people who are medical people, and people like Kennedy, and then, people on the right, not the left, and even people on the left. So they've censored all these people. And it's a slam dunk. There was one part I believe I missed, and maybe you guys will, it's so long. But there's a point where Kennedy he was asked about suing Fauci. And Kennedy had told this story about suing Fauci. Because President Trump put Kennedy on some committee, he got access to Fauci. And Fauci had called Kennedy a liar about stuff he said about, testing of the bloops, right? And Kennedy said, you've called me a liar. So, and Fauci was sitting in front of him with a bunch of papers and, like a folder full of folders, like a big, all these folders. And he said, can you cite one study that would prove that I was a liar? And Fauci said he had them, but he didn't have them with him. He said he'd get back to him, and Kennedy pursued it, and Fauci never got back to him. So Kennedy sued him, and Fauci wrote a letter saying Kennedy was right, even though he'd called Kennedy a liar. And Kennedy had written this epic book about Fauci. And the letter is now on his Children's Defense website or whatever, or it has been for a while. But being able to say it here, There are things that Kennedy said in interviews that he said here, and nobody challenged the veracity of what he said. Not one person tried to defend Fauci or these other things. And so it's truth, right? They're acknowledging it by Fauci not suing him for slander or any of these number of ways that they have never fought this thing. And you saw it in this hearing. They've never fought it. They're admitting to doing this. They're only making an excuse saying they have to censor your freedom of speech to keep you safe. They're saying if they don't change some of the fundamental building blocks of the system, it's going to collapse. Then it should collapse, right? You have to go down with your system. Like that's just the way it is. You might lose, you might, empires collapse, things collapse, right? You got to shoot your shot. You got to go out there and, you give it 3 swings, and sometimes you lose. Sometimes things don't go your way. Everybody dies, and this is part of it. But when you compromise your core principles, which America has done long ago, then, you're no longer America. And so you're just a zombie, ghoulish country, that's lost what was best about it. Anyways, only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting for the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.